Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story. And tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The morning sun of October 30th filtered through the tall windows of Hogwarts' Great Hall, transforming an ordinary autumn morning into something magical. Golden rays glided across the long tables where students breakfasted before lessons, and it seemed as though the very air smelled of magic and anticipation. Olivia Woodcroft sat at the Gryffindor table, barely noticing the taste of porridge in her bowl. Her dark auburn hair, pulled into an untidy ponytail, glinted with copper highlights, and her brown eyes were fixed on an old worn book spread open beside her plate. Next to her sat her best friend, Thomas Finley, a boy with curly wheat-colored hair and a constellation of freckles across his nose, who was currently attempting to secretly slip a piece of bacon to the ginger cat winding around their legs. Thomas was the sort of person who always found adventure where others saw only an ordinary day. "Liv, are you even listening to me?" Thomas asked, finally catching the girl's attention. "That's the third time I've asked if you're really going to do this." Olivia looked up at him, and such determined fire blazed in her eyes that Thomas couldn't help but smile. He knew that look. It meant his friend had already made up her mind, and nothing in the world would change it. "I found it, Tom," she whispered, leaning closer, as if afraid someone might overhear. "The book about the Courage Lanterns. It was hidden in the restricted section, in the Department of Forgotten Traditions. Can you imagine? A whole chapter about how Gryffindor celebrated Halloween 100 years ago." Her voice trembled with excitement. Thomas knew that for Olivia, this wasn't just an interesting find. Her older brother Marcus, who had left Hogwarts 2 years ago, had always told her stories about the ancient traditions of their house, about times when Gryffindor wasn't simply a house for the brave, but a true family united by common rituals and celebrations. Marcus had played for Gryffindor's Quidditch team, and it was thanks to him that Olivia had fallen in love with the game, with the spirit of competition and camaraderie that reigned among the players. "So what does it say?" Thomas asked, setting down his fork. His curiosity had won out over hunger. Olivia carefully turned the yellowed page. The paper rustled beneath her fingers, as if whispering ancient secrets. On the spread was a neat illustration. A group of students in Gryffindor robes stood in a circle, holding small lanterns in their hands. Each lantern glowed with its own color, from bright red to soft gold, from fiery orange to warm amber. "The Courage Lanterns." Olivia began to read, and her voice took on a solemn quality, as if she were quoting an ancient prayer. "A tradition founded by Godric Gryffindor himself in the first year of Hogwarts' existence. Every Halloween, house students would create their own magical lanterns, which served as a reflection of their inner courage. Red signified physical bravery, courage of the body. Gold symbolized moral courage, strength of spirit, the ability to do the right thing even in the face of fear. Orange represented emotional courage, the ability to be open, to show one's feelings, to love despite pain." Thomas listened with bated breath. Outside the Great Hall's windows, yellow leaves swirled in the air like tiny golden lanterns of nature. "But why was this tradition forgotten?" he asked. "It sounds wonderful. Why don't we make such lanterns anymore?" Olivia shrugged, and a disappointed expression crossed her face. "The book says the tradition faded about 50 years ago. The reason isn't entirely clear, but it seems that creating true courage lanterns requires not just magic. You need a special ingredient, something the book's author calls the light of a true deed. Without it, the lanterns are just ordinary glass spheres with a lumos charm." "The light of a true deed," Thomas repeated, furrowing his brow. "What does that even mean?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted, and disappointment rang in her voice. "But I want to find out. Imagine, Tom, if we could revive this tradition. If this Halloween Gryffindor shone with courage lanterns again. It would be..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Magical. Truly magical." At that very moment, Marion Privet joined them. a second-year girl with long dark braids and enormous grey eyes that always seemed a bit frightened. Marion was quiet and timid, and Olivia often wondered how the Sorting Hat could have placed her in Gryffindor, but then she remembered Professor McGonagall's words. Courage takes many forms, Miss Woodcroft. Sometimes the greatest bravery is needed simply to live another day. Good morning. Marion greeted quietly, sitting down opposite them. Her voice was barely audible over the din of the great hall. What are you talking about? Olivia smiled at her. Over the past year she had grown truly attached to this quiet girl who reminded her of a small bird that had fallen from its nest and was afraid to try flying again. About Halloween, she replied, and about how to make it special. Marion's eyes widened slightly. She loved holidays, Olivia knew. For a girl who had grown up in a strict family of pure-blood wizards, where emotions were considered weakness, every holiday at Hogwarts was a breath of freedom. What do you mean? She asked, and careful hope sounded in her voice. Olivia told her about the courage lanterns, about the ancient tradition, and about the mysterious ingredient she needed to find. Marion listened with bated breath, and when Olivia finished, the girl smiled shyly. That sounds beautiful, she whispered. I'd like to help, if I may. Of course you may, Olivia exclaimed, and several students at the neighboring table turned toward them. She shrugged sheepishly and continued more quietly. There'll be 3 of us. That's perfect. Thomas nodded, stroking the cat that had settled in his lap. Then the question remains, where do we start? How do we find this light of a true deed? Olivia pondered, gazing once more at the book's pages. The words danced before her eyes, forming themselves into ancient scripts and illustrations. Suddenly, something caught her attention. A small note at the bottom of the page, written in such tiny handwriting that she could barely make out the letters. There's something here, she muttered, bringing the book closer to her eyes. The light of a true deed cannot be bought or created. It can only be earned through an act of genuine courage, a deed done not for glory or recognition, but for another. Seek in places where fear meets love, where sacrifice becomes strength. The 3 friends exchanged glances. The words were beautiful, but incomprehensible, like most ancient magical texts. All right, said Olivia, closing the book with a decisive snap. We have all day, until the feast. We'll find a way to create these lanterns. I swear it on Gryffindor's honor. Thomas laughed, but merry sparks danced in his eyes. Are you always this dramatic? He inquired. Always, Olivia replied seriously, but the corners of her mouth smiled. The day began as an ordinary October 31st at Hogwarts. The castle awoke slowly, like an enormous living creature, stretching after a night's sleep. Olivia's and her friends' first lesson was Transfiguration, and she forced herself to concentrate on Professor McGonagall's words, though her thoughts wandered in quite a different direction. Minerva McGonagall stood before the class, slender and severely elegant in her velvet robes. Her hair was gathered in a tight bun, and her spectacles gleamed in the candlelight hanging beneath the classroom ceiling. She was transforming a white hamster into a silver box, and the transformation was so smooth and elegant that the students held their breath. The key to successful transfiguration, the professor said in her sharp but not unkind voice, lies not merely in the correct wand movement or incantation pronunciation. True magic is born from understanding. You must see not what is, but what it can become. You must believe in the transformation with every fiber of your being. Olivia noted these words, and something clicked in her mind. Understanding. Transformation. Belief. Didn't the same apply to the courage lanterns? They weren't simply magical objects. They were reflections of who a person was inside. A transformation of their inner essence into visible light. After the lesson, Olivia lingered, waiting until the last students left the classroom. Professor McGonagall noticed her and raised one eyebrow. A gesture that could mean many things, from approval to warning. Miss Woodcroft, she said, neatly folding her notes. Do you have a question about today's lesson? Olivia approached closer, clutching the book about the courage lanterns beneath her robes. She hesitated. Should she tell the professor about her plans? But McGonagall was head of Gryffindor House, and if anyone knew about ancient traditions, it would be her. Professor, Olivia began, and her voice sounded less confident than she would have liked. I found a book about an old Gryffindor tradition, about the Courage Lanterns. Have you heard of them? Professor McGonagall's expression changed. The severity softened slightly, and something like nostalgia appeared in her eyes. The Courage Lanterns, she repeated quietly, and it seemed those words carried her to a distant past. Yes, Miss Woodcroft, I've heard of them. Moreover, I saw them when I was a student myself. My 5th year, if my memory serves. That was the last time anyone managed to create true lanterns. Olivia's heart beat faster. Do you know how to make them? She asked hopefully. The book mentions the light of a true deed, but it doesn't explain what that means. McGonagall walked to the window, gazing at the school grounds where wind scattered yellow leaves. After a moment of silence, she spoke without turning. The light of a true deed isn't a spell or a potion, Miss Woodcroft. It's a moment. An instant when you do something truly brave, not because it's easy, not because it will bring you glory, but because it's right. In that moment, a special magic is born in your heart, pure and bright. It's precisely this magic that allows you to create a true courage lantern. She turned to Olivia, and her gaze held strictness, but also understanding. Why do you want to revive this tradition? The professor asked. Olivia hesitated. She could have said something about the house's history, about the importance of traditions, but something in McGonagall's gaze made her be honest. My brother always said that Gryffindor isn't just a house, she said quietly. It's a family. But sometimes I look around and see that we're just a group of people living in the same tower. We don't know each other, we don't support each other the way we should. I thought, if we could create something together, something beautiful and meaningful, perhaps it would remind us why we're all here. Professor McGonagall looked at her for a long time, and Olivia felt as though she was weighing each word, assessing the sincerity of her intentions. You have a brave heart, Miss Woodcroft, she finally said, and the right motives. But remember, true courage often comes at the most unexpected moments. Don't seek grand feats. Sometimes the greatest bravery is needed for the simplest things. She walked to her desk and retrieved a small glass sphere, no larger than an apple. The sphere was empty inside, and the glass shimmered in the light, as if covered with a thin layer of frost. This is the base for a lantern, McGonagall explained, handing the sphere to Olivia. They can be found in Professor Flitwick's office. He keeps such things for special projects. Take as many as you need. As for the rest depends on you. Olivia carefully took the sphere. It was cool to the touch, and strangely heavy, as if an invisible weight of all possibilities was hidden inside. Thank you, Professor, she whispered. McGonagall nodded, and the smallest smile touched the corners of her lips. Today is Halloween, Miss Woodcroft. A night when the boundary between possible and impossible becomes thin as gossamer. If there's a day for magic, this is it. Now go, you still have much work to do. Olivia rushed to find Thomas and Marion. She found them in the library, where Thomas was attempting to read a book about Quidditch history, and Marion was neatly transcribing potions notes. When Olivia told them about her conversation with Professor McGonagall, Thomas's eyes blazed with excitement. So we need to do something brave, he summarized. Something real. Well then, let's think. What feats can we accomplish before evening? Marion laughed quietly, and it was a rare sound. The girl didn't laugh often. You make it sound like an adventure from a fairy tale, she said. Isn't it an adventure? Thomas replied with a smile. We have a riddle, a mystery, and a day to solve everything. If that's not an adventure, then I don't know what is. They went to Professor Flitwick's office, the diminutive wizard, with perpetually disheveled grey hair, who taught charms. Flitwick was delighted with their project, and gave them a dozen glass spheres, each shimmering with its own inner light. Wonderful idea, he squeaked in his high voice, jumping with excitement. The professor was so small in stature that he had to stand on a pile of books to reach the upper shelves of his office. Courage lanterns. I thought that tradition was lost forever. If you manage to revive it, it will be a true celebration for the entire house. Having received the spheres, the three friends headed to Gryffindor Tower. The day outside was growing increasingly overcast. Low grey clouds crawled over the castle, and wind howled in the corridors like ancient spirits awakening on Halloween. But inside the castle it was warm and cozy. Candles burned with bright flame, driving shadows into corners. In Gryffindor's common room, excitement reigned. Students were decorating the room for the evening celebration. Someone was hanging orange ribbons. Someone was carving smiling faces into small pumpkins. The fireplace blazed with a merry fire, and the air smelled of cinnamon, nutmeg, and something sweet being prepared in the kitchens for the evening feast. Olivia, Thomas, and Marion settled in a corner by the window, spreading the glass spheres on the table. They tried various spells, Lumos, Lumos Maxima, even a complex eternal flame spell that Thomas found in a book about ancient magic. But nothing worked. The spheres glowed, yes, but it was ordinary magical light, cold and devoid of that special warmth felt in the old book's illustrations. Maybe we need to do this together? Marion suggested after hours of failed attempts. The book says it's about an act of courage. Perhaps it needs to be a collective act? Olivia pondered. Marion's words made sense, but what could they do? What adventure awaited them within Hogwarts' walls on this calm autumn day? The answer came unexpectedly, in the form of a small first year named Dennis Creevey. The boy ran into the common room, all red and breathless, his eyes wide with panic. His fair hair stuck out in all directions, and his robes were torn at the sleeve. "Help!" he shouted, looking around for older students. "Please, someone, help! Colin's stuck." Several students looked up, but most continued their activities. Dennis was known for his tendency to exaggerate. Last week he thought he'd seen a basilisk in the dungeons, but it turned out to be just a green ribbon fluttering in the wind. But Olivia stood, approached the boy, and crouched to be at eye level with him. "Dennis," she said calmly, "tell me what happened. From the very beginning." The boy swallowed air, trying to calm himself. "Colin and I decided to explore the castle," he began, his voice trembling. "We wanted to find secret passages that everyone talks about, and we found one. Behind Sir Cadogan's portrait on the 5th floor, there's a small door, and behind it, a narrow passage. Colin went in first, and I went after him. But then the stone started moving. The passage narrowed, and Colin got stuck. I can't pull him out, he's too big, and the stones keep squeezing." Olivia felt cold run down her spine. Hogwarts Castle was alive. Everyone who studied here knew that. Corridors changed, stairs moved, and walls sometimes revealed secret passages that disappeared the next day without a trace. But this also meant the castle could be dangerous, especially for those who didn't know its whims. "Tom, Marion," Olivia called, and a commanding note rang in her voice, one she'd often heard from her brother when he commanded the Quidditch team. "We're going." They ran after Dennis, who led them through the castle's corridors. Thomas managed to grab his wand, and Marion held a small vial of blue potion, a calming draught she always carried for panic attacks. Sir Cadogan's portrait hung on the 5th floor, and the knight himself was in full armor, waving his sword and shouting something about battles and honor. When they ran up, he greeted them cheerfully. "Ha, young warriors," he boomed. "Off to battle, to glorious adventure." "Something like that, sir," Olivia replied breathlessly, and Cadogan enthusiastically leaned aside, letting them pass. Behind the portrait indeed was a small door, barely visible in the shadow. Dennis pointed to it with a trembling finger. "There. Colin's somewhere in there, but I don't know how far. I got scared and ran out." Olivia bit her lip. The door was very small. Even she, not the tallest among her peers, would have to squeeze through with effort. For an adult or even a professor, it would be impossible. They would have to act alone. "Lumos," she whispered, and the tip of her wand flared with bright light. Thomas and Marion repeated the spell. Holding their wands before them, they crawled one by one into the narrow passage. Inside it was dark, damp, and very cramped. The walls of stone blocks seemed alive, as if breathing and moving in their wands' light. Olivia felt her heart beating faster. The air in the passage was stale, with a taste of antiquity and damp stone. Under Olivia's hands, the stone was cold and rough, covered with a thin layer of moss. She crawled forward, feeling the walls seemingly draw closer with each movement. Behind her she could hear Thomas's heavy breathing, and farther still, Marian's quiet moaning, who had never liked confined spaces. "Colin!" Olivia called, and her voice echoed in the darkness, distorted and strange. "Colin, can you hear me?" At first there was silence, so complete that Olivia could hear her own heartbeat. And then, somewhere ahead, a weak, trembling voice rang out, "Here, I'm here, help!" Colin Creevey was a year older than his younger brother Dennis, a skinny boy with a great love for photography. He always carried his magical camera with him, a gift from his parents for his birthday, and photographed everything that seemed interesting to him. Now his voice was full of fear, and Olivia felt something tighten in her chest. She crawled faster, feeling the stones scrape her knees through her robes. Her wand's light revealed strange shadows on the walls, some ancient symbols carved by long-forgotten hands. The passage twisted and turned, like a stone labyrinth created to confuse the traveler. And then she saw him. Colin was stuck, where the passage sharply narrowed. His head and shoulders had already passed through the tight spot, but his chest and stomach were trapped between two enormous stone blocks. The boy was trying to break free, but each movement only made the stones squeeze harder. His face was red from exertion, and tears stood in his eyes. "I can't move," he croaked when he saw the wand's light. "The stones, they're alive, they're squeezing." Olivia crawled as close as possible. Indeed, the stones seemed to breathe, slowly and methodically, narrowing the passage. This wasn't an evil spell or trap, it was the castle itself trying to close the secret passage, unaware that a boy was stuck inside. "Don't panic, Colin," Olivia said, trying to make her voice sound calm and confident, though inside fear gripped her. "We'll get you out, I promise." Thomas crawled up beside her, assessing the situation. His freckles wrinkled as he concentrated. "We can't just pull him out," he whispered to Olivia. "The stones are too strong. We need to widen the passage, but I don't know a spell powerful enough for that." Marian, who had reached them last, spoke quietly. Her voice trembled, but there was a confidence in it that Olivia had never heard before. "There's one spell," she said. "Diffindo. It's a severing charm. If I make the right cut in the stone, it will crack along the line and move aside. But," she hesitated, "but I've never used it on stone. I'm afraid I might hurt Colin if my hand shakes." Olivia looked at the small boy stuck between the stone blocks. His face was growing paler, and his breathing heavier. Time was running out. She needed to make a decision and make it now. "Marian," she said quietly, turning to her friend. "I believe in you. You can do this." Marian's grey eyes widened with surprise. "But what if I do something wrong? What if I—" "You won't," Olivia interrupted her. "I know you won't. You're the most careful and precise person I know. If anyone can do this right, it's you." Marian looked at her for a long moment, and Olivia saw a battle raging in the depths of her eyes, between fear and courage, between uncertainty and trust. And then the girl slowly nodded. "Colin," Marian said, and her voice became firmer, "I'm going to split the stone that's holding you now, but you need to be very, very quiet and not move. Not move at all. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, pressing his lips together to keep from crying. Marian took a deep breath, raised her wand, and aimed at the seam between the two stone blocks to the right of Colin. Her hand trembled, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and pure. "Diffindo!" A thin stream of blue-white light shot from her wand, like a blade. It struck precisely at the seam, and Olivia heard a quiet creak as the stone began to crack. Marian moved her wand slowly and carefully, creating a precise cut along the entire length of the seam. Dust fell on her face, but she didn't blink, all her attention focused on the wand's movement. And then, with a dull groan, the stone shifted. The cut was perfect. The stone moved aside exactly a few inches, enough for Colin to slip through. The boy exhaled with relief, and Thomas immediately grabbed his hands, pulling him backward. "Faster!" Olivia commanded, "before the stones close again." They crawled backward as fast as they could, pushing each other, stumbling and clutching at walls. Marian was last. and when she emerged from the small door behind the fat lady's portrait, the passage behind her closed with a loud creak for good. The four of them fell onto the corridor floor, breathless, covered in dust and bruises, but alive. Dennis rushed to his brother, hugging him so tightly that Colin groaned. "You're alive," Dennis exclaimed, his voice trembling with tears. I thought I'd lost you." Colin patted his brother's head, himself trying not to cry. "It's all right," he whispered. "Thanks to them." He looked at Olivia, Thomas, and Marion. "You saved my life." Olivia smiled, though her whole body ached from the strain. "It was Marion who did it," she said. "She was brave." Marion blushed, her cheeks reddening from embarrassment. She never got used to compliments, to recognition, but something new burned in her eyes. Pride, perhaps, or simply awareness of her own strength. The fat lady in her portrait applauded, her goblet of wine swaying dangerously. "Bravo, dears," she exclaimed. "True Gryffindor courage. Godric would be proud." They returned to the common room, accompanying the Creevy brothers. Colin and Dennis immediately rushed to the dormitory to tidy themselves up, and Olivia, Thomas, and Marion settled again by the window, where their glass spheres still lay on the table. The sun was already beginning to set, and the sky outside the windows took on shades of orange and pink. Halloween night was approaching, and the castle was preparing for celebration. Floating pumpkins appeared in corridors, ghosts began their rehearsals, and increasingly wonderful aromas came from the kitchens. Olivia took one of the glass spheres, holding it carefully like a bird's egg. She thought about what had happened, about Marion overcoming her fear, about Colin trusting them even in the darkest moment, about Dennis, whose love for his brother overcame his own panic. "The light of a true deed," she whispered. "A deed done not for glory, but for another." And then she understood. "We've already done it," she said aloud, and Thomas and Marion raised surprised eyes to her. "We found the light. It was there, in that passage. When Marion overcame her fear for Colin's sake. When we risked ourselves to save someone." She gripped the sphere tightly in her hand, closed her eyes, and recalled that moment. The moment when she saw fear in Marion's eyes and faith in her own. The moment when she understood that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Warmth passed through her hand, pleasant and soft like a sunbeam. Olivia opened her eyes and gasped. The glass sphere was glowing. Not with the cold white light of the Lumos spell, but with a warm, living radiance that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The color was golden, deep and pure, like molten sun. Light danced inside the sphere, creating patterns reminiscent of wings, hearts, stars. "It's glowing," Thomas exclaimed, grabbing his own sphere. "Liv, how did you do that?" "I just remembered," Olivia replied, still gazing enchanted at her creation. "Remembered what I felt. About courage. About faith." Marion carefully took her sphere, and Olivia saw her hands trembling. The girl closed her eyes, and so many emotions reflected on her face. Fear, doubt, and then something quiet and beautiful, like dawn after a long night. When Marion opened her eyes, her sphere shone with orange light, warm and soft like sunset. It was the light of emotional courage, the ability to be vulnerable, to show one's feelings, to trust others. Thomas was next. His sphere flashed red, bright, life-affirming color that spoke of physical bravery, of readiness to rush into adventure, of strength of body and spirit. They sat in their corner, holding their lanterns, and the light from them mixed, dancing on their faces. Other Gryffindor students began noticing them, approaching closer, asking what these wonderful things were. Olivia smiled, and told them about the courage lanterns, about the ancient tradition, about how to create one's own lantern. Word passed from one student to another, and soon the entire common room buzzed with excitement. Professor Flitwick brought more spheres, and students began creating their own lanterns. Each recalled their personal moment of courage, small or large, ancient or recent. Someone remembered defending a younger student from bullies. Someone admitting bad grades to parents. Someone acknowledging mistakes to a friend. And each sphere glowed with its own color, creating a kaleidoscope of shades, from crimson red to gentle pink, from bright gold to copper bronze. Gryffindor's common room transformed into a true sea of light. When it was time to go to the feast in the Great Hall, the Gryffindor students took their lanterns with them. They walked the castle's corridors, and their light reflected off stone walls, creating magical patterns. Other houses looked at them with wonder and admiration. "What are those?" a Slytherin girl asked, pointing at the lanterns. "It's our tradition," Olivia replied proudly. "Gryffindor's courage lanterns." The Great Hall was decorated for Halloween with particular splendor. Thousands of live bats fluttered beneath the enchanted ceiling, where a full moon floated among heavy clouds. Enormous pumpkins carved into smiling faces stood in corners, and orange and black ribbons hung from the ceiling. Golden plates were already filled with food: roasted chickens, potatoes, pumpkin pies, caramel apples. Professor Dumbledore stood at his place at the staff table, and his long silver beard gleamed in the candlelight. His blue eyes, behind half-moon spectacles, observed the students with warmth and interest. When he saw the Gryffindors with their lanterns, a smile appeared on his face. "The courage lanterns," he said quietly, but his voice somehow reached every corner of the hall. "I haven't seen them in many years. What a wonderful surprise this Halloween." Professor McGonagall looked at Olivia with an expression that could be called pride. She barely perceptibly nodded, and Olivia felt her heart overflow with warmth. The Gryffindor students placed their lanterns on their table, and the light from them created an amazing atmosphere. It was like a small bonfire of hope and courage in the middle of the Great Hall. During the feast, Colin Creevey approached their table with his brother Dennis. Colin held his magical camera, and a shy smile shone on his face. "I wanted to thank you again," he said to Olivia, Thomas, and Marion. "And I made something for you." He held out 3 photographs. In the first was Olivia holding her golden lantern, and the light from it made her look like an ancient goddess. In the second was Thomas laughing, and his red lantern pulsed like a second heart. In the third was Marion, and for the first time in a photograph she didn't look frightened. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile, and her orange lantern glowed like a small sun. "This is so you'll remember," Colin explained. "Remember this day. Remember how brave you were." Olivia carefully took the photographs, feeling her eyes fill with tears. She looked at her friends, at all the Gryffindor students gathered around their lanterns, at the castle that had become their home. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, and Marion took her hand. They sat together, surrounded by warmth and light, and Olivia knew this was a moment she would remember forever. Halloween at Gryffindor had always been a special celebration, but this year, it became something more. It was a reminder that true courage lives not in grand battles or heroic deeds, but in the small acts of kindness and bravery we perform each day. When the feast ended and Hogwarts, ghosts began their annual performance, dancing in the air and performing acrobatic tricks, the Gryffindor students returned to their tower. They carried their lanterns, and the light from them illuminated the castle's dark corridors. In the common room, they placed the lanterns on the mantelpiece, on tables, on windowsills. Each lantern was unique, each told its own story of courage. Together they created a symphony of light that filled the room with magic and warmth. Olivia stood by the window, looking at the moon rising over the forbidden forest. Her golden lantern stood on the windowsill beside her, and its light reflected in the glass, creating a double image. She thought about her brother Marcus, about how he had told her stories about Gryffindor. He said that being a Gryffindor meant being part of something greater than oneself. Now Olivia understood what he meant. "What are you thinking about?" Marion asked, approaching her. Olivia smiled without taking her eyes from the moon. "I'm thinking that Halloween is a night when the boundary between worlds becomes thin, between past and present, between fear and courage, between who we are and who we can become." Marion silently nodded, and they stood together, gazing into the night. Behind their backs, the common room was filled with laughter, songs, and the light of dozens of lanterns. This was magic not from books or spells. This was the magic of community, friendship, and courage. And in the archives of Hogwarts, in the dust of the ancient library, the old book about the courage lanterns quietly glowed, as if it knew its secret lived again. And perhaps, somewhere in the castle, the spirit of Godric Gryffindor himself smiled, seeing how his legacy continued in the hearts of young wizards. Halloween at Gryffindor ended not with fireworks or grand spells, but with something simpler, yet more magnificent: light. Light that is born when someone has the courage to be kind, the bravery to be vulnerable, the strength to do the right thing. And as long as these lanterns shone, Gryffindor was truly home to the brave. The morning of October 30th awoke in Hufflepuff's common room, softly and unhurriedly, like honey, slowly flowing from a spoon. Cedric Diggory was already awake. He sat in one of the large yellow-upholstered armchairs by the fireplace, examining a list he held in his hands. The fire in the hearth barely smoldered, casting amber reflections on the copper plant holders hanging from the ceiling. The air smelled of earth, fresh grass, and something sweet. Perhaps it was the scent of cacti growing on round wooden shelves along the walls, many of which waved their prickly branches in greeting to the morning. Cedric was in his 5th year, and this year he had been elected Hufflepuff prefect. It was an honor that simultaneously filled him with pride and responsibility. He had always loved his house, loved it for its genuine warmth, for how everyone here could be themselves, for the feeling of home that never left, even in the hardest moments. But being a prefect meant something more than simply wearing a badge. It meant caring for the younger students, especially the first years, for whom Hogwarts was still an enormous labyrinth of unfamiliar corridors and magical wonders. In the list Cedric held were the names of all Hufflepuff first years. 32 names. 32 small people, who only 2 months ago had first stepped across the castle's threshold, leaving behind their homes, their parents, their familiar lives. Cedric remembered his first Halloween at Hogwarts, how impressed he'd been by the feast's magnificence, how he'd marveled at the live bats beneath the ceiling, how he'd felt part of something great and magical. But he also remembered a girl from his year who that evening had quietly cried in a corner of the common room because she missed her mother. His finger stopped on one name: Hannah Abbott. Hannah was a quiet girl with fair hair gathered in 2 neat plaits and large blue eyes that always seemed slightly frightened. Cedric had noticed her a week ago in herbology. While other first years laughed and joked, repotting mandrakes, Hannah stood apart, holding her pot so carefully, as if afraid it might shatter from the slightest touch. And after the lesson, he'd seen her sitting alone in the library, staring at a book, but seemingly not reading it. Cedric knew that look. It was the look of someone who felt out of place, who was trying to understand whether they could ever call this place home. "Do you always wake so early?" came a sleepy voice, and Cedric turned. Ernie Macmillan was emerging from the boys' dormitory, his yearmate, and one of the most genuine people he knew. Ernie was a stocky boy, with curly chestnut hair that always stuck out in all directions in the morning, and a broad smile that could cheer anyone. Now he yawned, stretched, and approached the fireplace, plopping into the armchair beside Cedric. "Couldn't sleep," Cedric admitted, folding the list. "Was thinking about Halloween, about traditions." Ernie nodded, understanding. Among Hufflepuffs there was an unspoken rule, passed from generation to generation. This house was a family, and families had their traditions, especially on holidays. "The Honey Hearth Feast?" Ernie asked, his eyes lighting up. "We're doing it this year, aren't we?" "Yes," Cedric replied, "but I want to make it special. For the first years. Many of them still don't feel at home here. I think, perhaps if we show them this tradition, if they feel that they're loved and cared for here, it will help." The Honey Hearth Feast was one of Hufflepuff's oldest and most beautiful traditions. Legend said that Helga Hufflepuff herself, the house founder, had begun this tradition in the first years of Hogwarts' existence. Every Halloween, before the great feast in the Great Hall, Hufflepuff students gathered in their common room for a secret supper. They prepared dishes according to ancient recipes passed down by Helga, and each dish was special. Not simply delicious, but magical. Honey buns that warmed inside for hours after eating. Pumpkin soup that brought a feeling of comfort and safety. Apple and cinnamon pies that strengthened friendly bonds between those who ate them together. Ernie smiled, his face blooming with enthusiasm. "That's a wonderful idea, Cedric. What do we need to do?" Cedric unfolded his list again, but this time it was a different list, of ingredients and tasks. "We need to gather a team," he said. several older students to help with preparation. We need ingredients. Some from Professor Sprout's greenhouses, some from the kitchens. And we need time. We must manage everything before evening. I'll get Justin and Susan, Ernie offered, standing. They're always ready to help. And you'll speak with Professor Sprout? Cedric nodded. Pomona Sprout was head of Hufflepuff House and herbology teacher, and he knew she would support their idea. She herself often spoke about the house's ancient traditions, about how important it was to maintain connection with the past. The day began with ordinary lessons, but Cedric could barely concentrate. Even in defense against the dark arts, which usually captivated him completely, his thoughts wandered. He thought about how much honey they would need, whether there were enough fresh herbs in the greenhouses, whether they could persuade the house elves to share flour and spices. When lessons finally ended, Cedric rushed to the greenhouses. The October sun was already beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The wind was cool, smelling of fallen leaves and damp earth. The greenhouses stood beside the castle, large glass structures inside which humid warmth reigned, and the most amazing plants grew. Professor Sprout was in Greenhouse 3, tending to curly plants that resembled small green explosions. She was a short woman with graying hair peeking from beneath a patched hat and perpetually earth-stained hands. But warmth always burned in her eyes, making every Hufflepuff student confident they were special. Professor Sprout, Cedric called, entering the greenhouse. May I speak with you? She turned, and a smile appeared on her face. Mr. Diggory, of course, dear. What brings you here on such a lovely day? Cedric told her about his plan, about the Honey Hearth Feast, about the first years, about how he wanted to make this Halloween unforgettable. Professor Sprout listened attentively, and when he finished, her eyes moistened. Oh, Cedric, she whispered, what a beautiful idea. Helga would be proud of you. Of course, you may take everything you need. Let's see what we have. Together they walked between rows of plants, and Professor Sprout explained the properties of each herb, each root. This here, she said, pointing to a plant with silver leaves, is called moon mint. Add it to a drink and it will grant calm and clarity of thought. And this, she stroked a fluffy plant with golden flowers, is honey thyme. Its aroma brings a feeling of home, even if you're thousands of miles from your native walls. Cedric carefully cut several sprigs of each plant, placing them in a basket Professor Sprout had brought. The smell was amazing, fresh, slightly sweet, with notes of earth and summer. What about honey? He asked. The recipes always mention special honey, but I don't know where to find it. Professor Sprout smiled mysteriously. There's one hive, she said quietly, in the Forbidden Forest, on its edge. Magical bees live there, not dangerous if you treat them respectfully. Their honey has the property of strengthening bonds between people, but getting it isn't simple. The bees give their honey only to those who come with a sincere heart and good intentions. Cedric hesitated. The Forbidden Forest was, as its name suggested, forbidden to students. But Professor Sprout seemed to read his thoughts. I'll give you permission, she said. But take someone with you, and be careful. The hive is by the old oak, the one with a heart-shaped hollow. You'll see it immediately. Cedric thanked her and hurried back to the castle. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows across Hogwarts grounds. He needed to hurry. In the common room, Ernie, Justin Finch-Fletchley, and Susan Bones were already waiting for him. Justin was a lanky boy from a Muggle family who always marveled at magic as if seeing it for the first time, and Susan was a calm girl with long red hair and a serious demeanor. We've already collected flour and spices from the kitchens, Justin reported. The house elves were very happy to help. One of them, Twiggy, said he remembers the Honey Hearth Feast from when he was a very young house elf. Excellent, said Cedric. But we still need honey, special honey. And it's in the Forbidden Forest. His friends' faces became serious. The Forbidden Forest wasn't a place for evening strolls. I'll go with you, Ernie said without hesitation. Me too, Susan added. Cedric looked at them and smiled. This was why he loved Hufflepuff. Here no one left friends alone with danger. They set out when twilight had already thickly wrapped Hogwarts grounds. The moon rose above the Forbidden Forest's trees, large and bright, nearly full. The air was cold, and their breath turned into small clouds of vapor. Cedric held his wand at the ready, saying quietly, "Lumos." Light flooded the darkness, and the three friends walked toward the forest's edge. The trees stood tall and dark, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like bony fingers. But Cedric felt no fear, rather excitement. This was an adventure, a mystery, something that made this Halloween truly special. They found the old oak almost immediately. It stood in a small clearing, enormous and ancient, and indeed in its trunk was a hollow shaped like a heart. Near the hollow, on a branch, hung a hive, large and golden, and bees flew around it even in the darkness. But these bees weren't like ordinary ones. They glowed with soft golden light, like little stars. "They're beautiful," Susan whispered, freezing in place. Cedric stepped forward, extinguishing his wand's light. He didn't want to frighten the bees. Remembering Professor Sprout's words, he breathed slowly and evenly, trying to calm his heart. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet and sincere. "Honored bees," he said, feeling slightly odd talking to insects, but continuing nonetheless, "I've come to ask for your gift. Not for myself, but for my younger housemates who need warmth and a feeling of home. We want to prepare a special supper for them that will remind them they're not alone. Your honey, they say, has the power to bring people closer. Could you share it with us?" For a moment, silence reigned. The bees hung in the air, their golden glow pulsing to some invisible rhythm. Cedric felt something warm touch his heart, not physically, but deeper, as if the bees were looking into his very soul, weighing his intentions. And then one bee, the largest of all, flew toward him. It circled around his head, leaving a trail of golden light, then flew to the hive. Other bees joined her, and together they began to hum, not anxiously, but melodiously, as if singing a song. From the hive, honey began to flow. It dripped slowly, golden and viscous, like liquid sun. Cedric quickly retrieved a small jar he'd brought and held it beneath the stream. The honey filled the jar, and its aroma was incredible, sweet, warm, with notes of flowers and summer sunshine. When the jar was full, the honey's flow stopped. The bees circled around Cedric again, and he felt their gratitude, for coming with a sincere heart, for not trying to deceive or take more than needed. "Thank you," he whispered, bowing. "Thank you." The three friends returned to the castle, carrying their treasure. The moon illuminated their path, and Cedric felt warmth blooming in his chest that had nothing to do with magical honey or the cauldron by the fire. In the common room, other students were already waiting for them. News of the feast had spread among the older Hufflepuffs, and many had come to help. On the tables already lay ingredients: flour, spices, vegetables from the greenhouses, fresh milk from the house elves. The fireplace blazed brightly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the air filled with anticipation of something special. Cedric placed the jar of honey on the table, and everyone froze, looking at it with reverence. "Is that it?" Susan asked quietly. "The magical honey?" "Yes," Cedric replied. "And now let's begin preparing." The cooking wasn't simply a process. It was a ritual, magic of another kind. Each student had their task. Ernie kneaded dough for honey buns, his large hands carefully mixing flour and golden honey. Justin chopped vegetables for soup, his movements slow and focused. Susan prepared spices, grinding cinnamon and nutmeg in a mortar, filling the room with their spicy aroma. Cedric walked among everyone, helping here and there, but mostly observing. He saw how students worked together, how they laughed and joked, how their faces bloomed with joy of common work. This was the true magic of Hufflepuff, not spells or potions, but the ability to create home where people with kind hearts gathered. "Cedric," Susan called, "we need your help with the soup. I'm not sure how much moonmint to add." He approached the large cauldron hanging over the fire in the hearth. The soup inside was golden, smelling of pumpkin, ginger, and something subtle, almost imperceptible, the feeling of autumn, comfort, home. Cedric carefully added a few moonmint leaves, watching them dissolve in the soup, leaving thin silver patterns on the surface. "Perfect," Susan commented. Now it needs to simmer another 15 minutes. Time flew unnoticed. Hufflepuff common room's walls were warm from the fire and cooking smells. Plants growing on windowsills and hanging from the ceiling danced in the flames, reflections, some waving their leaves as if encouraging the cooks. Finally, everything was ready. On the tables stood honey buns, still steaming and emanating a golden glow. A large cauldron of soup was set on a separate table, beside it, a stack of bowls and spoons. On another table lay apple and cinnamon pies, their crust golden brown, and sweet amber juice peeked from the top slits. And everywhere, in each dish, magical honey was present, not so much that its taste was felt, but enough to give the food special properties. "Time to bring the first years," said Cedric, and excitement sounded in his voice. Ernie and Justin went to the dormitories, and in a few minutes first years began returning. They entered in small groups, curious and slightly confused. Many hadn't been to such gatherings yet, and their eyes widened with surprise when they saw the decorated room, the set tables, the smiling faces of older students. Among them was Hannah Abbott. She entered last, holding the door's edge as if uncertain whether to come in. Her fair hair was plaited in 2 braids, and her face bore an expression Cedric had seen before, a mixture of hope and fear, desire to belong and fear of being rejected. Cedric approached her, crouched to be at eye level, and smiled. "Hello, Hannah," he said softly. "I'm glad you came. This is a very special evening." The girl looked at him with her large blue eyes. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "Why has everyone gathered here?" "It's called the Honey Hearth Feast," Cedric explained. "It's an ancient tradition of our house, begun by Helga Hufflepuff herself. Every Halloween we gather together to prepare a special supper. Not just food, it's magic that makes us closer, that reminds us we're a family." Hannah's eyes moistened slightly. "Family," she repeated. "But I miss my real family. My mum and dad." Cedric nodded with understanding. "I know," he said, "and that's completely normal. I missed them too when I first came to Hogwarts. But you know what? You can have more than one family. Your mum and dad will always be your family. Nothing will change. But here, at Hufflepuff, you have another family. And we all care about you, Hannah." The girl pondered, then shyly nodded. Cedric extended his hand, and she took it. Together they approached the tables where other students were already gathering. Professor Sprout had also joined them, and her face glowed with pride and joy. She raised her hand, and the common room quietened. "Dear Hufflepuff students," she began, her voice warm as honey, "tonight we've gathered to celebrate one of our house's most beautiful traditions. The Honey Hearth Feast is a reminder that we're strong not individually, but together. That true magic lives not in spells but in hearts that care for one another. Helga Hufflepuff believed that everyone deserves a place where they're loved and accepted as they are. And today, thanks to the wonderful work of Cedric and other older students, we have the opportunity to feel this magic again." She raised her goblet filled with warm apple cider with honey time. "To Hufflepuff," she proclaimed, "to the home we create together." "To Hufflepuff," all students chorused, raising their goblets. And then the supper began, and it was as a true supper should be. Full of laughter, conversations, warmth, the honey buns truly warmed inside, filling everyone who ate them with a feeling of comfort, like warm embraces. The pumpkin soup brought calm and clarity, dispersing all anxieties and fears. And the apple and cinnamon pies had the most amazing property. When 2 people ate from one pie, an invisible connection arose between them, a thin thread of understanding and affection. Cedric sat beside Hannah, watching her slowly open up. At first she ate silently, timidly raising her eyes. But then another first year, a girl named Megan Jones, began telling a funny story about how she'd accidentally transformed a frog into a cushion in Transfiguration. And Hannah laughed. It was a quiet, shy laugh, but it was laughter. And then she herself began talking about her home, about how her cat always slept on her pillow, about how nervous she'd been before leaving for Hogwarts. And gradually, very gradually, Cedric saw her face change. Fear receded, replaced by something else. Trust, joy, a feeling of belonging. When the supper was drawing to a close, and students were already lying in soft armchairs by the fireplace, satiated and content, Hannah approached Cedric. Her eyes were no longer so frightened. "Thank you," she said quietly. for doing this for us, for showing me that I can be happy here." Cedric smiled, and his heart overflowed with warmth that had nothing to do with magical honey or the cauldron by the fire. "You always belonged here, Hannah," he replied. "You just didn't know it yet, but now you do, and we're all glad you're with us." The girl nodded, then unexpectedly hugged him, quickly and shyly, but sincerely. Then she ran to the other first years who were already playing some game by the fire and joined them without hesitation. Ernie approached Cedric, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did a good thing," he said. "Look at them, they're happy." Cedric looked at the common room filled with laughter and light. At the first years who no longer looked lost. At the older students who remembered what it meant to care for others. At Professor Sprout sitting in an armchair and smiling, watching all her students like a mother proud of her children. "I didn't do this," Cedric replied quietly. "We all did this. Together. Because that's what Hufflepuff is about, isn't it? We're strong together." Time flew quickly, and soon it was time to go to the great feast in the Great Hall. Hufflepuff students began gathering, donning robes and straightening their hair, but the common room still retained the atmosphere of their secret supper. The smells of honey and cinnamon, the fireplace's warmth, the feeling of community. Cedric was the last to leave. He lingered for a moment, surveying the room. The tables were cleared, but on the mantelpiece still stood the small jar, with remains of magical honey, golden and glowing in the firelight. Beside it lay a small note, written in Hannah's neat handwriting, "Thank you for home." Cedric smiled, carefully took the note and tucked it into his pocket. This was the best reward he could receive. When Hufflepuff students walked the corridors to the Great Hall, they walked not as a group of separate people, but as a single whole, a family. Their faces glowed with happiness, and in the air around them seemed to linger a subtle aroma of honey and cinnamon, a reminder of what they'd experienced together. The Great Hall was decorated for Halloween with special luxury. Thousands of live bats circled beneath the enchanted ceiling, where a full moon shone through sparse clouds. Enormous pumpkins stood in corners, carved into smiling faces, and orange and black ribbons hung from the ceiling. Golden plates on tables were already filled with food, roasted chicken, potatoes, pies, vegetables. But for Hufflepuff students, this feast was special, not because of decorations or food. It was special because they came here together, already connected by invisible threads of friendship and care. When they sat at their table, Hannah sat beside Cedric without hesitation, and Megan Jones sat on the other side. Other first years also positioned themselves among older students, and there was no feeling of division between younger and older. There were simply Hufflepuffs. Professor Dumbledore rose from his place at the staff table, and his long silver beard gleamed in the candlelight. His blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles surveyed the hall with warmth. "Good evening," he said, and his voice filled the hall though he didn't shout. "Welcome to our annual Halloween feast. Tonight we celebrate not only an ancient holiday, but also the spirit of community that unites us all under Hogwarts' roof. Each house has brought here its traditions, its values, and together we create something truly magical." His gaze lingered for a moment on Hufflepuff's table, and Cedric saw understanding flash in the headmaster's eyes. Somehow Dumbledore knew about their Honey Hearth Feast, about the magic they'd created this evening. "May this holiday remind us," Dumbledore continued, "that the strongest magic in the world is the magic of human hearts connected by love and care. And now, enjoy your meal." The feast lasted long, filled with conversations, laughter, and joy. Hogwarts ghosts appeared toward the end, performing their annual show. The Fat Friar, Hufflepuff's ghost, was especially cheerful this evening, telling jokes and playing games with first years. When he flew through the table, Hannah laughed so loudly that everyone turned, and it was the happiest sound Cedric had heard all day. When the feast ended and students returned to their common rooms, night had already deeply descended on the castle. The moon hung above Hogwarts, towers large and bright, and stars twinkled like tiny diamonds on a velvet sky. In Hufflepuff's common room, the fireplace still blazed, though the fire was less intense now. Students settled in their favorite spots, some in armchairs, some on the carpet by the fire, some read books, some simply remained silent, enjoying the comfort. Hannah sat in a small armchair by the window, looking at the moon. The round window, located almost at ground level, showed a view of the dandelion glade where even now, at the end of October, they still grew thanks to the castle's magic. The girl held a small honey bun she'd taken from the common room and occasionally took small bites from it. Cedric approached her quietly. "Everything all right?" he asked. Hannah turned to him and smiled. A real, genuine smile. "More than all right," she replied. "I was thinking about what you said earlier. About being able to have more than one family. And I understood that you're right, I still miss my mum and dad. But now I know that here, at Hufflepuff, I have a home too." Cedric sat on the floor beside her armchair, looking out the window at moonlight pouring onto the grass. "You know what's best about home?" he asked quietly. "Not the walls, not the roof, not even the fireplace's warmth. The best thing is the people. People who accept you as you are. Who rejoice when you rejoice and support you when things are hard. And Hufflepuff has always been about that. About care, about loyalty, about no one having to be alone." Hannah nodded, and tears glistened on her cheeks, but these were happy tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for today, for everything." "Thank Helga Hufflepuff," Cedric replied with a smile. "It was her tradition. We just kept it alive." They sat silently for a few more minutes, listening to the quiet hum of conversations in the room, the crackling of fire in the hearth, occasionally, the rustling of leaves from plants growing on windowsills. Hufflepuff's common room was filled with peace and comfort, the feeling of safety that comes only when you know you're loved. Later that night, when everyone had already dispersed to their dormitories, Cedric stood alone by the fireplace, looking at Helga Hufflepuff's portrait hanging above the mantel. In the portrait, the house founder held a small golden goblet, raising it in a toast to her students. Her face was kind, and warmth burned in her eyes that hadn't faded even across centuries. "Thank you," Cedric whispered to the portrait, "for teaching us to care for one another." And it seemed to him, though perhaps it was only a play of moonlight, that Helga smiled a bit wider, and her goblet tilted slightly, as if she was returning the toast. Cedric climbed to his dormitory, where Ernie was already sleeping, sprawled on his bed and snoring quietly. He lay on his own bed, covered with a warm patchwork quilt, and closed his eyes. In the air still lingered a subtle aroma of honey and cinnamon, a reminder of the magic they'd created today. And as sleep took him, Cedric smiled. This had been a truly special Halloween, not because of adventures or dangers, but because of something simpler and deeper. Because of the warmth that comes when you do something kind for others, because of the joy you feel when you see someone find their home. And in the common room, by the dying fireplace, the small jar of magical honey still stood on the mantelpiece, glowing with soft golden light. And if someone listened carefully, they might hear barely audible humming, as if distant bees sang their song, blessing the home Hufflepuff students had created. Halloween at Hufflepuff ended not with fireworks or grand celebrations, but quietly and warmly, like embraces before sleep. And that's how it should be at home, with love, care, and the feeling that you're in your place. The night of October 30th enveloped Hogwarts Castle in deep velvet darkness, and only the moon, nearly full, poured its silver light through the tall windows of Ravenclaw Tower. Marcus Silverquill stood by one of these windows, gazing at the lake far below, which shimmered like liquid silver. His thin face with high cheekbones was thoughtful, and dark eyes behind spectacles in a thin bronze frame reflected the moonlight. In his hands he held an old book, so old that the parchment pages had yellowed and become brittle, and the ink on them had faded to barely visible grey. Ravenclaw's common room was a wide circular chamber at the very top of the castle's western tower, and it was here that Marcus spent most evenings of his 6th year. The ceiling was dome-shaped, painted with an image of the night sky, with countless stars that twinkled and sometimes even moved, forming constellations. The carpet underfoot was midnight blue, also studded with a star pattern reflecting the ceiling. The walls were decorated with blue and bronze silks that billowed in the wind, penetrating through tall, arched windows. This wind was never cold. It was soft and gentle, bringing with it a subtle aroma of autumn, mountains, and distant stars. By the door leading to the dormitories stood a tall white marble statue of Rowena Ravenclaw, the house founder. It was carved with such mastery that it seemed the woman was about to come alive and step down from the pedestal. On her head was a diadem, a delicate circlet with an eagle's feather and stars, carved in marble. Beneath the diadem was an inscription in thin, elegant script. "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." Marcus loved this room. He loved its silence, filled with the rustling of pages and quiet conversations of students discussing complex theorems or magical theories. He loved how moonlight transformed ordinary furniture, tables, armchairs, bookcases, into something magical, silver and unreal. And he especially loved the small library in the alcove, which held rare books accessible only to Ravenclaws. It was there in this library that he had found the book he now held. It was called Riddles of the Founders, the First Century of Hogwarts, and was written by an unknown author approximately 200 years ago. Marcus had found it by chance today afternoon, whilst searching for materials for a history of magic essay. The book stood on the highest shelf, almost invisible, covered with dust and cobwebs. But something, perhaps intuition, perhaps simply curiosity, made him pull it down. And now, as he turned pages by moonlight, his heart beat faster with excitement. For this book told of something Marcus had only dreamed about Ravenclaw's ancient traditions, about how Rowena Ravenclaw taught her first students, about riddles and puzzles she left them to develop their minds. And most interesting, the book mentioned the Midnight Riddle Symposium. Marcus knew about the symposium, of course. It was Ravenclaw's annual tradition that took place every Halloween. Students gathered at midnight in the common room and created complex magical riddles. Some were verbal, some visual, some required not only mind but magical intuition. The winner received the right to be first to read the Book of Ravens, an ancient tome that appeared in the common room only on Halloween, contained the wisdom of centuries, and vanished with the first ray of dawn. Marcus had been preparing for this year's symposium for a week already. He was creating a riddle that would be worthy, something that would make even the cleverest Ravenclaws pause and think. But now, reading this ancient book, he understood that the symposium had once been something more than simply a competition. Rowena Ravenclaw believed, Marcus read aloud, his voice quiet in the empty room, that true wisdom lies not in knowing answers, but in the ability to ask the right questions. Every Halloween she created the Great Riddle, a mystery that led her students through the castle's corridors, revealing before them stories, lessons, and deep truths. The student who solved the Great Riddle received not a prize or award, but something more valuable: understanding. Marcus stopped, feeling goosebumps run down his skin. The Great Riddle. Why did no one in the house mention this? Why had this tradition been forgotten? He continued reading, and on the next page found something that made him hold his breath. There, drawn in barely visible ink, were words that glowed very faintly. So faintly they could only be seen by moonlight. "Seek me, where the shadow of the hand falls north on the night when the veil is thin. There, where time meets eternity, and questions become answers." This was a riddle. Rowena's riddle. Marcus felt adrenaline course through his veins. This was a chance to find something that had been lost for centuries, a chance to walk the same path as Ravenclaw's first students. He closed the book and looked around the common room. Other students had already gone to bed. It was late, almost midnight. Tomorrow was Halloween, and many were preparing for the feast and the symposium after it. But Marcus couldn't wait. If he understood the riddle correctly, time was important. The night when the veil is thin meant Halloween, and shadow of the hand falls north could only mean one place in the castle: the astronomy tower. Marcus took his wand and the book, and quietly left the common room. Ravenclaw's door had no ordinary lock. Instead, on it was a bronze knocker in the shape of an eagle. As Marcus exited, the eagle asked in its melodious voice, "What can be seen twice in a month, once in a week, but never in days?" Marcus smiled. This riddle was simple for a Ravenclaw. "The letter N," he replied. "Wisely spoken," the eagle whispered, and the door opened. Marcus descended the winding spiral stairs, his footsteps echoing in the night castle's silence. The moon illuminated corridors through narrow windows, casting long shadows on stone walls. Portraits on the walls dozed, their figures quietly snoring or muttering something in sleep. Sometimes Marcus heard the distant mewing of Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, or the echo of patrolling prefects' footsteps, but he was careful and avoided encounters. The astronomy tower was one of the castle's highest points, and to reach it required climbing long stairs. Marcus walked quickly, his breathing growing heavier with each floor. Finally, he emerged onto the upper platform, where students usually conducted astronomy lessons. The tower was open to the sky, without a roof, and the wind here was stronger than in the common room. It brought the smell of mountains and cold night. In the middle of the platform stood a large telescope, and around it were drawn diagrams of constellations. And there, in the northeastern corner, stood an ancient sundial, an old instrument Ravenclaws used for studying celestial bodies, movements. Marcus approached the sundial. It was a bronze construction covered with green patina from age. In the center protruded a gnomon, a metal pointer that cast a shadow on the dial, showing time by the sun. But now, at night, by moonlight, the shadow fell differently, and indeed, the gnomon's shadow pointed exactly north. Marcus knelt and carefully examined the sundial's base. His fingers glided over the bronze surface, searching for some irregularity, some sign, and then he felt it, a barely noticeable depression, a tiny symbol engraved in the metal. By moonlight it barely showed, a silhouette of an eagle with spread wings. "Lumos," Marcus whispered, and his wand tip flared with soft light. Now he saw more clearly. The eagle symbol wasn't simply decoration. Beneath it were words written in ancient runes. Marcus had studied runes in Professor Babbling's lessons, and though his knowledge wasn't perfect, he could read basic text. Wisdom flies on time's wings. When shadow shows the way, the key reveals itself beneath the word of truth. Word of truth, Marcus pondered. What could that mean? A password? A spell? He turned the book's pages, still holding it, searching for clues, but found nothing. And then, it struck him. Word of truth. This wasn't a password. It was Ravenclaw's motto, the words carved beneath the diadem on Rowena's statue. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. But how to tell this to the sundial's base? Marcus tried speaking the words aloud, but nothing happened. He tried touching the eagle symbol with his wand and speaking the phrase, but again, nothing. Then he remembered another lesson from Professor Babbling, about how ancient magic often required not words, but understanding. Perhaps he needed not to say the answer, but to show he understood it. Marcus closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He thought about Ravenclaw, about what this house meant to him. It wasn't simply a place where intelligence was valued. It was a place where they understood that true wisdom wasn't the accumulation of knowledge, but its application. It was a place where questions were asked, not just answers sought. It was a place where everyone could be themselves, even if their thoughts were unusual, or their ideas strange. And when this thought filled his mind, something happened. The eagle symbol beneath his fingers began to glow, first dimly, then brighter and brighter, until it shone with pure silver light. Suddenly the sundial's base shifted. With a quiet creak that spoke of centuries of immobility, the bronze panel slid aside, revealing a small niche inside. In the niche lay a scroll of parchment, sealed with blue wax, bearing an eagle's impression. Marcus carefully took the scroll. The parchment was cold to touch and smelled of antiquity. He broke the seal, and the wax crumbled into blue dust that sparkled in the moonlight. Unrolling the scroll, he saw text written in elegant handwriting, surely Rowena Ravenclaw's own hand. "Dear seeker of wisdom, if you read these words, you have passed the first step. You found the beginning of the great riddle. But finding is not the same as understanding. The true riddle lies not in answers, but in questions we ask ourselves. Your next step lies where past meets present, where stories are older than memory. Seek among those who no longer live but still remember. There you will find what you seek, not an answer, but understanding. Remember, wisdom is not what you know, but how you use what you know. Questions are more important than answers. And the most important question always begins with the word, why? With respect and hope, Rowena Ravenclaw, Marcus reread the text twice, then thrice. His mind was already working, analyzing each word, each clue, where past meets present, where stories are older than memory. Seek among those who no longer live, but still remember. Ghosts. She was speaking about Hogwarts, ghosts. And which ghost knew the most stories, the oldest secrets of the castle? The Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's ghost. True name, Helena Ravenclaw, Rowena's daughter. Marcus carefully rolled the parchment and placed it in his robe's pocket. He descended from the astronomy tower, his steps quicker now, filled with new excitement. But where to find the Grey Lady at midnight? Hogwarts ghosts had their favorite places, but they were also capricious, especially the Grey Lady, who was always the quietest and most reclusive ghost of the castle. But Marcus knew one place where she often appeared, the library. Helena Ravenclaw, even in life, loved books as much as her mother. And even after death, she often wandered between shelves, gazing at volumes she could no longer read. The library at night was a completely different place than during the day. It was empty, quiet, and darkness between tall shelves seemed deeper, almost alive. The moon shone through narrow windows, creating long strips of silver on the floor. Marcus walked carefully, trying not to make unnecessary noise. Madame Pince, the librarian, had an unpleasant habit of appearing at the most unexpected moments, even at night. He walked between rows of books, his eyes searching for a familiar silhouette in the air. And then he saw her. The Grey Lady floated near the ancient magic section, her semi-transparent form glowing with soft silvery radiance. She was a beautiful woman, even as a ghost. Long hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her face bore an expression of sad contemplation. Lady Ravenclaw, Marcus called quietly but respectfully. The ghost turned to him, and surprise appeared on her face. The Grey Lady rarely spoke with students. She was withdrawn and distant, too occupied with her own thoughts and memories. "Who are you, boy?" she asked, her voice like a distant echo. "My name is Marcus Silverquill, my lady," he replied, bowing. "I'm a Ravenclaw student, 6th year. I seek your help." She looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something flash in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or memory of something long forgotten. "Help?" she repeated. "Why do you think I can help you?" Marcus retrieved the parchment from his pocket and showed it to her. "I found this," he said. "A riddle left by your mother, Rowena Ravenclaw. It points to you. Seek among those who no longer live but still remember. You know stories, my lady. You remember what others have forgotten." The Grey Lady's expression changed. Sadness became deeper, but something else also appeared, perhaps hope or warmth. "The great riddle," she whispered. "I haven't heard of it for centuries. I thought that tradition was lost forever." "You knew of it?" Marcus asked, unable to hide his excitement. "Knew?" The Grey Lady laughed quietly, and it was a sad sound. "I was the first to solve it. Mother created it for me when I was a student. She wanted to teach me that wisdom isn't what we know, but how we use our knowledge. That the most important questions are those we ask ourselves about our own hearts." She fell silent, gazing somewhere into the distance, into a past only she could see. "But I didn't understand that then," she continued quietly. "I thought wisdom was power. That knowledge made me better than others. And I stole my mother's diadem, the diadem that, they said, granted wisdom to whoever wore it. I fled with it, hid, and when mother came for me, I refused to return. And then came illness, and she died without ever seeing me again." The Grey Lady's voice trembled, and Marcus felt his own throat tighten with compassion. He knew this story. All Ravenclaws knew the tragedy of Helena Ravenclaw, who stole her mother's diadem and brought shame to her family. "I'm very sorry, my lady," he said sincerely. The Grey Lady looked at him, and quiet gratitude was in her eyes. "You're a kind boy," she said, "and therefore I'll help you. My mother's great riddle had 3 parts. The first, to find the beginning. You've done that. The second, to understand the story. And the third, to apply the lesson." She extended her hand, and though it was semi-transparent, Marcus felt a cold touch when she touched his forehead. "The story you must understand is my own," she whispered. "A story about how the pursuit of wisdom without understanding its true nature can lead to tragedy. Mother created the great riddle not to teach students answers. She created it to teach us to ask the right questions. And the most important question she wanted us to ask ourselves was, why do I seek knowledge? For power? Or for understanding? For myself or for others?" Marcus held his breath. It was so simple yet so profound. He thought about himself, about his love for books and study. Why did he love knowledge? Was it simply curiosity, desire to be cleverer than others, or something more? "The third part," the Grey Lady continued, "is application of the lesson. You must take what you've learned and use it not for yourself but for others. That is true wisdom, not to accumulate knowledge, but to share it. Not to be the cleverest in the room, but to help others become cleverer." She stepped back, and her form became even more transparent, as if she was expending her energy on this conversation. "Go now," she said. "Return to your common room. There, by my mother's statue, you'll find the last part of the riddle. But remember, the answer isn't in a book or magic, the answer is in your own heart." And with these words, she dissolved into the air, leaving Marcus alone in the dark library. He stood motionless for several minutes, digesting what he'd heard. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Memories, reflections, understanding, and then he ran. The spiral stairs to Ravenclaw Tower had never seemed so long. Marcus ran, his breathing heavy, heart pounding in his ears. When he reached the door with the bronze eagle, it asked another riddle. "What becomes bigger when you take something away?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "A hole," he replied. The door opened, and he entered the common room. It was empty. All students were sleeping. Only moonlight illuminated the space, transforming it into a fairy tale land of silver and blue. Marcus approached Rowena Ravenclaw's statue. It stood where it always had, white and majestic, with a diadem on its head and wise gaze of marble eyes. He examined the pedestal, searching for something unusual, some sign. And then he saw it. On the statue's base, where earlier there had been nothing, now glowed text, words written in the same silver light he'd seen at the astronomy tower. "You have walked the path of the riddle, seeker of wisdom. You found the beginning, heard the story, and now comes time for the final step. The question isn't what you found, but what you will do with this knowledge. The Book of Ravens will appear at midnight, as always, but the true treasure isn't in the book. The true treasure is understanding that wisdom means responsibility. Share your knowledge, ask questions, help others seek answers, and remember the greatest wisdom is knowing that you don't know everything." The words hung in the air another moment, then slowly vanished, as if they'd never been. Marcus stepped back, feeling something shift in his chest. Not physically, but deeper, at soul level. He understood. He truly understood. The great riddle wasn't about finding treasure or winning a competition. It was about a journey of self-discovery, about realizing that true wisdom comes not from accumulating facts, but from understanding how to use those facts for others' good. The clock on the wall struck midnight, and Marcus turned. On one of the tables where a second ago there had been nothing, a book appeared. The Book of Ravens. It was enormous, bound in dark blue velvet, with bronze clasps. On the cover was embossed an eagle with spread wings. But Marcus didn't rush to it immediately. Instead, he sat in an armchair by the fireplace, where fire had just begun to kindle. Perhaps the castle's magic sensed the book's presence, and pondered. Tomorrow evening would be the Midnight Riddle Symposium. Students would bring their clever riddles, would compete, and the winner would receive the right to be first to read the book. But now Marcus understood that this competition had lost its true essence. It had become about winning, about being the cleverest, not about learning and growth. And then an idea was born in him. Marcus spent the rest of the night by the fireplace, writing. He wrote on parchment, his handwriting neat and focused. He wrote a riddle, not to be the cleverest, but to remind his housemates about their house's true essence. When morning came and the first students began descending from dormitories, Marcus still sat by the fireplace. The Book of Ravens lay on the table, unopened. And on the wall above the fireplace hung new parchment, attached by magic. On it was written, "To all Ravenclaws, Tonight we gather for the Midnight Riddle Symposium, as we do every Halloween. But I want to propose something different. Instead of competing for who is cleverest, let us celebrate what makes us truly wise. Our love of knowledge, our curiosity, our ability to learn from one another. I propose that this year's symposium be not a competition but a shared quest. Let each bring not a riddle to defeat others, but a question to share with everyone. Let us together seek answers, teach one another, grow together. The Book of Ravens awaits us. But instead of one reading it first, let us read it together, sharing the wisdom it contains. For true wisdom is not what you know alone, it is what you share with others. Marcus Silverquill. The day passed in a whirl of lessons and preparation for the feast. Ravenclaw students read the parchment, discussed it, some were surprised, some intrigued. Marcus answered questions, explained his idea, and gradually, he saw understanding appear in his housemates' eyes. When evening came, and students gathered in the great hall for the festive feast, Marcus sat at Ravenclaw's table, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and calm. The great hall was decorated for Halloween, live bats, enormous pumpkins, orange ribbons, but Marcus barely noticed. His thoughts were already in the common room, where the symposium would soon take place. After the feast, Ravenclaws returned to their tower. The door with the bronze eagle opened again and again, admitting students who brought their parchments, their ideas, their excitement. At midnight, the common room was full. Students sat in armchairs, on the carpet, stood by windows. The moon shone brightly, stars twinkled on the ceiling, and the air was filled with anticipation of something special. Marcus stood by Rowena's statue, and beside him on the table lay the Book of Ravens. "Friends," he began, his voice quiet but everyone heard him in the focused silence. "Tonight we have an opportunity to do something different, not to compete, but to learn. Not to win, but to grow together." He told them about the great riddle, about what he'd learned from the Grey Lady, about Rowena Ravenclaw's lessons. Students listened spellbound, and Marcus saw understanding spark in their eyes. "So I propose," he continued, "that today we don't compete for the right to read this book first. Instead, let each share a question that troubles them, for which they seek an answer. And let us together, as a house, as a family of minds, seek these answers." Silence fell. Marcus waited, unsure how others would react. And then, one student, a fourth-year girl named Padma, stood. "I want to ask a question," she said. "I've always wondered, why do we study magic? Is it to become stronger, or to make the world better? How do we know we're using our knowledge correctly?" Another student, an older year, replied, "I think it depends on our intentions. Magic is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or evil. The question isn't why we study magic, but what we do with what we've learned." And so began a real conversation. Students asked questions, some complex, some simple, but all sincere. They spoke about magic, about morality, about what it meant to be wise. They discussed, debated, but always respectfully, always with desire to understand rather than defeat. Marcus sat and listened, and his heart filled with warmth. This was what Rowena had dreamed of, not competition of minds but cooperation. Not striving to be cleverest, but striving to learn. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, and students began dispersing to dormitories, tired but satisfied, Professor Flitwick approached Marcus. The small charms professor, head of Ravenclaw House, had witnessed everything, sitting quietly in a corner. "Mr. Silverquill," he said, his voice full of pride, "you did something remarkable today. You reminded us all about Ravenclaw's true essence. Rowena would be proud." Marcus blushed. "Thank you, Professor, but I didn't do this. Rowena did, by leaving her riddle. I simply found it." Flitwick smiled. "Sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when to follow others. Wisdom. The Book of Ravens is still here, Mr. Silverquill. It's yours to read." Marcus looked at the book lying on the table, unopened, then he smiled. "No, Professor. If I may, I'd like us to read it together. The whole house. Throughout the year. Weekly, perhaps, a small group of students could gather and read one chapter, then share what they learned with others. That way, everyone will have a chance to learn, not just me." Professor Flitwick's eyes gleamed. "A wonderful idea," he whispered. "Truly wonderful." That night, when Marcus finally lay down to sleep in his dormitory, he gazed through the round window at the stars above the castle. He thought about the great riddle, about all the lessons he'd absorbed, and he smiled, knowing he hadn't just found answers. He'd found the right questions. And above it all, on her marble pedestal, Rowena Ravenclaw's statue stood in silence, her eyes gazing at students with love that had survived centuries. And on her lips, whether in reflections of moonlight or in the stone's very magic, was a smile of wisdom that never fades. Halloween at Ravenclaw ended not with fireworks but quietly and thoughtfully, in silence, reflection, and endless quest for understanding. For true wisdom doesn't shout, it whispers. And those who have the courage to stop and listen will hear its voice across the centuries. The morning of October 31st awoke in Hogwarts, dungeons in its own special way. Here, far beneath the earth where sunlight never penetrated the thick stone walls, there was no difference between dawn and noon. The same cool semi-darkness always reigned, illuminated only by the greenish glow that filtered through windows looking out onto the bottom of the Black Lake. But Slytherin students felt changes in the air. This was Halloween, and even here, in the deepest corners of the castle, this night's magic was already beginning to stir. Astra Malraux awoke earlier than the others. She lay in her four-poster bed, draped with heavy velvet curtains the color of dark emerald, gazing at the dormitory ceiling where shadows from the Black Lake's water danced in an endless, soothing dance. Beyond the windows, enormous shadows slowly drifted past, fish, perhaps, or water weeds swaying in the current. Sometimes, a weak ray of light from the surface broke through the water, and then the entire room flashed with silver-green glints for a moment. Astra breathed in deeply the dungeon's cold air. It smelled of damp stone, lake water, and something else, perhaps ancient magic that had soaked these walls over centuries. This was Slytherin's scent. And though many students from other houses considered it unpleasant or sinister, for Astra it meant home. She rose, pushing aside the heavy curtains, and stepped barefoot onto the cold stone floor. Around her, other girls from her year breathed quietly. Millicent Bulstrode, who lay sprawled on her back, snoring softly, and Daphne Greengrass, who looked elegant even in sleep, her long fair hair spread across the pillow. Astra didn't want to wake them. She needed time alone, time to think about what awaited her this evening. The silver mirror ceremony. Astra approached the small dressing table by her bed and glanced at her reflection in an ordinary mirror. The girl looking back at her had long dark hair the color of a raven's wing, falling in straight strands to mid-back. Her eyes were an unusual shade, not quite green, not quite gray, but something in between, like the lake's color on an overcast day. Her face was pale, with high cheekbones and a determined chin, features of the ancient pure-blood Malraux family that stretched through centuries. On her left wrist gleamed a thin silver bracelet engraved with the family crest, a serpent coiled around a sword. Astra touched the bracelet, feeling its cool surface. The Malraux family had always been devoted Slytherins, each emerging from this house, each achieving great heights, in the ministry, in business, in magical society. But great heights often also meant dark choices. Her great-grandfather had served in the Wizengamot, but was also known for his cruelty toward Muggleborns. Her grandfather owned the largest apothecary in Diagon Alley, but rumors circulated about his connections with dark wizards. And her father always told her that being a Malraux meant being strong, ambitious, uncompromising. Weakness is a sin, Astra, he said, and pity is weakness. But when Astra looked at her reflection now, she wasn't sure she believed that. She wasn't sure she knew who she truly wanted to become. And tonight, during the silver mirror ceremony, she would have to look not into an ordinary mirror, but into one that showed truth. And she feared what she might see. Astra dressed quickly, black skirt, white blouse, robes with Slytherin serpent on the chest, and a silver prefect's badge. She plaited her hair into a low ponytail, leaving a few strands to frame her face, and left the dormitory. Slytherin's common room was already awake. Several early risers sat by the fireplace where green fire burned, a peculiarity of their house, achieved by magical potion added to the wood. This fire gave no ordinary warmth. It was cooler, yet at the same time soothing, as if accepting one into its embrace. The common room's walls were decorated with dark green marble with silvery veins, and the floor was laid with black stone polished to a mirror shine. Above the fireplace hung Slytherin's great crest, a silver serpent on a green background, and beneath it, the house motto engraved in silver letters: cunning, ambition, resourcefulness. Low velvet armchairs and sofas, the color of dark emerald, were scattered throughout the room, creating cozy corners for reading or conversations. From the ceiling hung enchanted lanterns that glowed with dim green light, and most impressive were the windows, tall arches looking directly onto the black lake's bottom. Now, in the early hour, the water was dark, almost black, and only occasionally a large shadow showed through, the giant squid, perhaps, or a school of small fish. "Good morning, Astra," greeted the boy sitting closest to the fireplace. It was Terence Higgs, a 7th year and Slytherin's other prefect. He was tall and thin, with sharp facial features and piercing dark eyes. Terence was always serious, sometimes even gloomy, but Astra knew that beneath this mask hid a good heart. "Good morning, Terence," she replied, sitting in the armchair opposite him. "You couldn't sleep either?" He nodded, setting aside the book he'd been reading. "Was thinking about the ceremony. It's your first time as a prefect, isn't it?" Astra nodded. Last year she'd been merely a participant in the ceremony, one of many students who looked into the silver mirrors. But this year, as newly elected prefect, she was meant to help organize the ritual, explain its meaning to younger students, support them if they saw something that frightened them. "I'm nervous," she admitted quietly. "What if I can't manage? What if someone sees something terrible and I don't know what to say?" Terence looked at her attentively, his dark eyes seeming able to see through all protective masks. "Astra," he said softly, "you're one of the cleverest and strongest students I know, but I've also noticed you're sometimes too hard on yourself. Mirrors don't show something terrible, they show truth. And truth is only frightening when we're not ready to accept it." She hesitated, then asked what troubled her most. "What if the truth is that I'm not who I should be? What if the mirror shows my ambitions are wrong? That I don't match what my family expects?" Terence leaned forward, his voice becoming more serious. "Astra," he said quietly, "the ceremony exists not to show you who you should be. It exists to show who you want to be. And the difference between these two things is the most important thing you'll ever understand." Before Astra could respond, other students began descending into the common room. The day was beginning, and with it came duties. After breakfast in the great hall, where the air already smelled of the coming feast, pumpkins, cinnamon, and baked apples, Astra returned to the dungeons. She had a free morning, as teachers always gave prefects opportunity to prepare for their houses, special events. She went to the small room beside the common room, the prefect's room, quiet and cozy, with tables for study and a small library. There she found Terence already spreading ancient parchments on the table, instructions for conducting the silver mirror ceremony. "Look," he said when Astra approached, "it says here that before the ceremony we should speak with first and second years separately, explain what to expect. Many of them will be nervous." Astra took one of the parchments and began reading. The words were written in archaic language, full of formalities. "The silver mirror ceremony is the most ancient tradition of the noble house of Slytherin, founded by Salazar Slytherin himself in the first years of Hogwarts School's existence. The ceremony's purpose is to help students see their true ambitions, purified of external expectations and social pressure. The mirrors, placed in the underwater chamber beneath the Black Lake, are enchanted with ancient magic of self-knowledge. One who gazes into the mirror sees not their physical reflection, but a visual embodiment of their deepest desires and aspirations." Astra read on, and with each sentence her nervousness only grew. This was serious magic, ancient and powerful, and she would have to help conduct it. "Astra," Terence called, and she looked up. "I know you're worried, but remember, we're not alone. Professor Snape will be with us, and most importantly, we have each other. Slytherin isn't just a house, it's a family. Dark perhaps, sometimes strange, but a family." She smiled, for the first time that morning feeling genuine warmth. "Thank you, Terence. That's important to hear." The day dragged slowly, filled with ordinary lessons, but Astra's thoughts constantly returned to the evening. In potions, Professor Snape was particularly attentive to her. He always knew when his Slytherin students were experiencing something important. When the lesson ended and other students left, Snape called her. "Miss Malrow, stay for a moment." Astra approached his desk. Professor Severus Snape stood by his underground office's window, facing a glass jar in which something resembling pickled frogs' eyes floated. His long black hair was gathered in a ponytail, and his black robes made him resemble a large predatory bird. When he turned to her, his dark eyes were unreadable, but not hostile. "Tonight is the ceremony," he said without preamble, his voice soft, but with that particular sharpness that always made students listen carefully. "Your first time in the role of prefect." "Yes, Professor," Astra replied, trying to make her voice sound confident. Snape looked at her for a long time, and Astra had the feeling he saw much more than she wanted to show. "You're afraid," he stated. "It wasn't a question." Astra lowered her gaze. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. What if I let the house down? What if I—" "Miss Malrow," Snape interrupted, and a barely perceptible note of, what? Kindness? No, not kindness. Understanding sounded in his voice. Fear of self-knowledge is a sign of intelligence, not weakness. Only fools aren't afraid to see themselves truly. But, he paused, allowing fear to control you is true weakness. He approached a shelf and retrieved a small glass vial with silvery liquid inside. "Take this," he said, handing her the vial. 3 drops in water before the ceremony. It will calm the mind but not dull feelings. You'll have the clarity necessary to see truth and accept it." Astra carefully took the vial. It was cool and heavy in her hand. "Thank you, Professor," she whispered. Snape nodded, already turning back to his jars and bottles. "One more thing, Miss Malrow," he said without turning. "Slytherin has a reputation, a dark reputation. And many think being ambitious means being cruel, that striving for greatness necessarily leads to darkness." He turned, and she saw something rare in his eyes, something like vulnerability. "But ambition is a tool, and a tool can build a palace or destroy it. The choice always belongs to whoever holds the tool." These words accompanied Astra throughout the rest of the day. She thought about them in Transfiguration, when Professor McGonagall explained complex transformations. She thought about them at lunch when she sat at Slytherin's long table among her housemates. And she thought about them when, after lessons, she descended to the common room to finally speak with younger students about the ceremony. In the common room, all Slytherin first and second years had already gathered, about 25 students, young faces looking at her with a mixture of excitement and fear. Astra stood by the fireplace, feeling the green flame's warmth at her back, and tried to find the right words. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, and her voice rang clearer than she expected. "As you all know, tonight, after the feast, the Silver Mirror ceremony will take place. For first years, this will be the first time, so I want to explain what to expect." She paused, looking at the young faces. One boy particularly caught her attention. He sat slightly apart from the others, his hands nervously gripping the edge of his robes. He was small even for a first year, with fair, almost white hair, and large grey eyes. Something in his posture reminded Astra of herself: loneliness, uncertainty, fear of not meeting expectations. "The ceremony takes place in an underwater chamber beneath the Black Lake," Astra continued. "It's a special place created by Salazar Slytherin himself. Silver mirrors stand there, enchanted with ancient magic. When you look into these mirrors, you see not your external reflection. You see your true ambitions, your deepest desires, what you truly want to achieve in life." "What if we see something bad?" asked a small girl with dark curls. Her voice trembled. "Mum said everyone in our family did. Everyone did dark things. What if the mirror shows I will too?" Astra approached her and crouched to be at eye level. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Clarice Knott," the girl whispered. "Knott." Astra knew this surname. One of the ancient pure-blood families known for connections with dark magic. Clarice's father was likely a Death Eater, like many who had served Voldemort. But the girl before her was only a child, frightened by the burden of her surname. Clarice, Astra said, holding her small hands in hers. The mirrors don't show who you should be. They don't show what others expect of you. They show what you yourself desire, deep in your heart. And even if you were born into a family with a dark past, your future belongs only to you. Do you understand? Clarice slowly nodded, and a spark of hope appeared in her eyes. Terence, standing to the side, added, I saw many things in the mirrors when I was younger, and none of them were bad or good. They were simply mine, my dreams. And the most important thing I understood is that you have the right to your own dreams, even if they differ from what others want. Astra continued telling about the ceremony, about how it would proceed, about safety, and the support students would have. But her gaze constantly returned to that small boy sitting apart. When the meeting ended, and students began dispersing, she approached him. Hello, she said. I'm Astra. What's your name? The boy looked up at her, and she saw his eyes were red from restrained tears. Cormac Vasey, he whispered. Vasey? Astra didn't recognize the surname, which was unusual. She knew most pure-blood families. First year at Hogwarts? She asked, sitting beside him on a low sofa. He nodded. I don't know why the hat sorted me into Slytherin, he said, his voice almost soundless. I'm not ambitious, I'm not cunning, I can't do anything special. Astra felt something tighten in her chest. She remembered this despair, this fear of not being good enough. Cormac, she said softly, the sorting hat doesn't make mistakes. It sees in us what we ourselves sometimes don't see. And if it sorted you into Slytherin, you have ambitions. Perhaps you simply don't know what they are yet. But I'm afraid, the boy admitted, and tears finally rolled down his cheeks. Afraid to see in the mirror that I want something bad, or that I don't want anything at all. Astra hugged him, quickly, sisterly, and felt him press against her like a small, confused creature. Listen carefully, she said. The mirrors will show you truth. And truth can be frightening, but it can also be beautiful. And I'll be nearby, all right? I'll be there. And if you become frightened, you look at me, and I'll remind you that everything will be fine. Cormac nodded, wiping tears with his robe sleeve. Astra spent the rest of the day in the common room, talking with various students, answering questions about the ceremony. And gradually, listening to their fears and hopes, she began to see something important. There was one boy, a second year named Adrian Pusey, who dreamed of becoming a healer. But my father says that's a profession for Hufflepuffs, he confided to Astra, that a true Slytherin should strive for power, not serving others. There was a girl, Tracy Davis, a third year with enormous talent for potions. I want to invent new potions, she said with fire in her eyes, not for battle or dark magic. For beauty, so people feel beautiful. But everyone says that's an empty pursuit. And most unexpected was Miles Bletchley, a fifth year and Slytherin's Quidditch team keeper. A tall, muscular boy whom everyone considered a typical Slytherin. Ambitious, competitive, uncompromising. But when Astra accidentally caught him in the library, he was reading, not a book about Quidditch tactics, but a collection of Muggle poetry. Don't tell anyone, he asked, hiding the book. They'll think I'm soft. But I love words, love how they can create worlds. I want to write. Perhaps even more than I want to play Quidditch. Astra looked at all these people, at their diverse dreams, their fears, their hopes, and something in her began to change. She'd always thought being a Slytherin meant striving for power, status, recognition, that ambitions had to be grandiose and harsh. But now she saw that ambitions could take countless forms, that striving to create beauty was also ambition, that dreaming of healing was also strength, that wanting to write words that would touch someone's heart was no less grand a goal than running the ministry. When evening finally came and students gathered in the great hall for the feast, Astra sat at Slytherin's table and ate almost mechanically, not tasting the food. The hall was decorated so lavishly it took your breath away. Thousands of live bats, enormous pumpkins with carved faces, orange and black ribbons beneath the ceiling. Ghosts performed their annual show, nearly headless Nick, attempting to completely remove his head, which caused laughter and applause. But Astra barely noticed all this. Her thoughts were already there, beneath the lake, in the underwater chamber, where silver mirrors waited. Finally the feast ended, and Professor Snape rose from his place at the staff table. His black robes seemed even darker against the festive decorations. "Slytherin students," he said, and his voice, though quiet, somehow reached every Slytherin in the hall. "Time for our tradition. Follow me." They rose and left the great hall, a long procession in black robes, with silver and green reflections. Other houses watched them, some with curiosity, some with suspicion, some simply with incomprehension. Astra felt these gazes on her back, but walked with head held high. She was a Slytherin, and tonight she would finally learn what that truly meant for her. They descended to the dungeons, past the common room, and continued walking deeper, through corridors rarely traveled. The air became increasingly cold, increasingly damp. The walls here weren't smooth marble, but rough stone covered with green moss. The sound of water was everywhere, trickling, splashing, the distant rush of current. Finally they reached a small door, barely visible in shadow. Snape touched the door with his wand, and whispered something in an ancient language. The door opened with a quiet creak, revealing a narrow spiral staircase leading down. "Careful," Snape warned. "The stairs are slippery." They descended one by one, holding onto damp stone walls. Astra walked somewhere in the middle of the procession, feeling her heart beat faster with each step down. The light of their wands, lumos, dozens of voices whispered, cast dancing shadows on the walls. And then the stairs ended, and they emerged into a space that took the breath away from everyone seeing it for the first time. It was a chamber, a large round room with a high dome-shaped ceiling. But the ceiling and walls weren't stone, they were glass. Thick, strong magical glass, behind which flowed the Black Lake's water. The water was dark, almost black, but moonlight from the surface penetrated through it, creating moving spots of silver and blue. Enormous fish slowly drifted past the glass, their bodies glinting with scales. Waterweeds swayed in invisible current, as if dancing a slow, soothing dance. And sometimes, very rarely, an enormous shadow showed through the water, the giant squid living in the lake's depths, its tentacles stretching incredible lengths. The chamber's floor was laid with black stone, smooth and cold. Around the perimeter stood tall silver candlesticks on which green fires burned, the same as in the common room. Their light shimmered on the water behind the glass, creating a magical play of light and shadow. And in the chamber's center, in a perfect circle, stood the mirrors. 12 mirrors, each as tall as a person, set in elaborate silver frames, covered with ancient runes. The mirrors' surfaces reflected nothing. They were dark, like black glass, and only when someone approached closely did they begin to glow with dim silver radiance. Astra stood and gazed at this picture, feeling cold creep down her spine. This was beautiful and frightening simultaneously. This was a place of great magic, ancient power. And now she would have to become part of it. Professor Snape stood in the center of the mirror's circle. His black figure stood out against the green light, like a shadow among shadows. "This place," he began, his voice echoing in the chamber with special depth, "was created by Salazar Slytherin over 1,000 years ago. He believed true power comes not from external achievements but from understanding oneself, from knowing one's true desires, one's true goals." He paused, looking at the gathered students. "The mirrors you see are enchanted with self-knowledge magic. They don't show the future. They don't show what will happen. They show what you desire in your soul's depths. And sometimes," his voice became softer, "this truth can be unexpected." He raised his wand, and the mirrors flared with brighter radiance. "The ceremony is simple. You approach a mirror, look into it and see. There are no right or wrong answers, no good or bad ambitions. There's only you and your truth." Astra felt Terence touch her elbow. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She nodded, though she wasn't truly sure. The ceremony began. Students approached the mirrors in turn. Older ones first, showing example to younger. Astra watched as each stopped before a mirror, gazed into it, and different expressions appeared on their faces. Surprise, joy, sometimes tears. Miles Bletchley looked into the mirror for a long time, and when he stepped away, a quiet smile was on his face. Later, Astra asked him what he'd seen. "Myself," he replied. "Older. With a book in my hands. My book, with my name on the cover. And I was happy, truly happy." Tracy Davis saw herself in a laboratory surrounded by gleaming bottles and flasks, and her reflection was creating something beautiful, a potion that shimmered with all rainbow colors. Adrian Pusey saw himself in a healer's white robes, and such pride and determination was in his eyes that Astra understood. Regardless of what his father said, this boy would become a healer. Finally came the first year's turn. Little Clarice Knott approached a mirror on trembling legs. She looked for a long time, and Astra saw the girl first tense, then her eyes widened with surprise, and then, the happiest smile Astra had seen all day bloomed on her face. When Clarice stepped away, Astra asked, "What did you see?" "I saw myself with children," Clarice whispered, her eyes glowing. "Many children, little wizards. I was a teacher. I was teaching them magic, but also love and kindness. Things I was never taught at home, and the children smiled at me. They loved me. I can be a teacher, can't I?" "Even if I'm a Knott," Astra hugged her tightly. "You can be anyone, Clarice. Anyone at all." Cormac Vasey was one of the last. The small boy approached a mirror so quietly, as if afraid it might hear him. Astra stood nearby, ready to support if needed. Cormac looked into the mirror, and a whole storm of emotions played across his face. First fear, then surprise, then tears, but not sad tears. Happy ones. When he stepped away, Astra approached him. "What did you see?" she asked gently. The boy wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I saw myself," he whispered, "with animals. With magical creatures. I was caring for them, healing them. And there was a dragon. A baby dragon. And it looked at me as if it trusted me. As if I was important. I think..." He hesitated. "I think I want to work with magical creatures. Like Hagrid. Is that normal? For a Slytherin?" Astra crouched and took his hands. "Cormac, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful, beautiful dream. And yes, it's absolutely normal. Slytherins can be anyone. We can have any dreams." And then came her turn. Astra approached one of the mirrors, feeling every student watching her. She was a prefect. She had to be strong, confident. But inside she trembled. The mirror before her was dark, as always. Astra breathed deeply, remembered Professor Snape's words about ambition being a tool, and looked. At first she saw nothing but darkness. And then, the darkness began to dissipate, and an image appeared. She saw herself. Older, perhaps 10 years. She stood in a large room resembling a classroom but cozier. Around her sat children, wizards of various ages, and all looked at her with attention and respect. On the wall behind her was a sign. Malraux Academy, School of Defensive Magic for all. For all. Not only for purebloods. Not only for the wealthy. For all. In the vision she was teaching, demonstrating complex defensive charms. But she also laughed with students, touched their shoulders with encouragement, hugged those who cried. She wasn't simply a teacher, she was a protector. She'd created a place where children could learn to protect themselves and others, regardless of their background. And most importantly, in the vision she was happy, truly deeply happy. Astra stepped back from the mirror, and tears were on her cheeks. She hadn't noticed she was crying, but tears flowed on their own, not from sadness, but from relief, from understanding, from joy. This was what she truly wanted. Not to run the ministry, not to accumulate power or wealth, not to continue her family's dark traditions. She wanted to teach, wanted to protect, wanted to create something that would change the world for better. One student at a time, Terence approached her and hugged her, asking nothing. He was simply there, and that was all she needed. When all students had passed through the ceremony, Professor Snape again stood in the circle's center. "What you saw today," he said, "belongs only to you. You're not obligated to share it. But remember, your ambitions, your dreams aren't a sentence. They're possibilities. And only you decide how to use them." He looked at Astra, and she thought approval flashed in his dark eyes. "You're all Slytherins. This means you're ambitious, cunning, resourceful. But it doesn't mean you must be cruel. It doesn't mean you must choose darkness. Ambition can build empires, yes. But it can also build hospitals, schools, sanctuaries. It can create beauty, heal wounds, protect the weak. He paused, allowing the words to settle. Slytherin has a dark reputation. And I won't lie, some who passed through these walls chose a dark path. But many others chose differently. And it's you. He swept his gaze across all students, who will decide what Slytherin's reputation will be in the future. The return to the common room was quiet. Students walked wrapped in their thoughts, in their new knowledge about themselves. But when they entered the common room, the atmosphere changed. Someone, perhaps house elves, had already managed to decorate the room for Halloween. Green and silver ribbons hung from the ceiling. Small pumpkins carved into serpent shapes stood on tables. The fireplace blazed brighter than usual, filling the room with warmth unusual for the dungeons. And students began talking. Not about what they'd seen, those secrets remained personal, but about what they felt. About relief. About hope. About understanding they could be themselves, even here, in Slytherin, the house with the darkest reputation. Clarice Knott sat by the fireplace with other first years, and for the first time in 2 months at Hogwarts she laughed. Real, ringing laughter of a child who finally felt free. Cormac Vasey told older students about magical creatures, about dragons and griffins, and his eyes burned with such enthusiasm that everyone around smiled. Miles Bletchley retrieved his hidden poetry book and began reading aloud, and no one mocked, no one jeered. On the contrary, students listened, enchanted by the words, beauty. Astra stood by the window, gazing at the Black Lake's water swaying behind the glass. Terence approached her, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, a tradition older prefects always maintained after the ceremony. "Are you all right?" he asked. She took the cup, feeling its warmth in her palms. "I'm more than all right," she replied. I understood. I understood who I truly am, and who I want to be." "Want to share?" he asked, not insisting. Astra hesitated, then smiled. "I want to teach," she said quietly. "Want to create a place where all children, regardless of background, can learn to protect themselves and others. I know my family will be disappointed. They wanted me to become an important person in the ministry or marry someone powerful, but that's not me. I want to do something meaningful, something real." Terence was silent a moment, then raised his cup. "To true ambitions," he said, "to the courage to be oneself." They clinked cups, and chocolate's warmth spread through Astra's body, mixing with the warmth of new understanding, new purpose. Later, when most students had already gone to bed, and only a few older years remained in the common room, Professor Snape unexpectedly appeared in the doorway. This was unusual. Usually he didn't visit the common room after the ceremony. He approached the fireplace where Astra, Terence, and several other prefects sat. "Miss Melrow," he said, "walk with me." It wasn't a request, but neither was it an order. Astra stood and followed him. They left the common room and walked the corridor to a small balcony, one of the few places in the dungeons where you could see part of the castle grounds through a narrow window. The night was clear, the moon large and bright. Wind brought the smell of the lake and fallen leaves. "You saw something that surprised you," Snape said. Again, it wasn't a question. Astra nodded. "I saw myself as a teacher. I want to create a school, a place where children can learn to protect themselves." Snape remained silent for a long time, gazing at the moon. "Your family won't approve," he finally said. "I know. They'll say you're wasting your potential, that you could become someone important. I know that too." Snape turned to her, and in the dim light his face seemed softer than usual. "Miss Melrow," he said quietly, "being a teacher is one of the most important things a person can do. It's shaping the future, one young soul at a time. It's being the one who lights a fire in darkness, who shows the path when others are lost." He paused, and Astra saw something rare in his eyes, something like vulnerability. "I became a teacher not by my own choice," he continued. "I was forced by circumstances. But even I, with all my complexity, understand this role's value. And if you choose it voluntarily, with a pure heart and noble purpose, you'll do more good than any minister or official." Astra felt tears fill her eyes again. "Thank you, Professor," she whispered. That means a great deal to me." Snape nodded, already returning to his usual cold demeanor. "Now go to sleep, Miss Malrow. Tomorrow will be a new day. And you have many years ahead to prepare for your dream." When Astra returned to the common room, she felt changed. Not outwardly. Outwardly she was still the same girl with dark hair and grey eyes. But something had fundamentally shifted inside. She approached the window looking onto the lake and gazed at her reflection in the glass. Behind her, in the water, a large fish slowly drifted past, its scales shimmering in moonlight. And suddenly Astra saw it, not with eyes, but with understanding. Slytherin wasn't about darkness. It never was about darkness. It was about depth. About how beneath the surface hides much more than visible from above. About how true power comes not from dominating others, but from understanding oneself. The Black Lake seemed sinister to those who looked at it from shore. But here, underwater, it was beautiful, mysterious, deep, full of life. So too was Slytherin. So too was she herself. Astra smiled at her reflection. She was a Malrow. She was a Slytherin. And she was going to use her ambition, her cunning, her strength, to make the world better. Not because it was easy, not because her family would approve, but because it was right, and because finally, for the first time in her life, she knew who she truly was. Halloween at Slytherin ended not with grand celebration but with quiet, deep understanding. In the dungeons it was still cool, the water beyond the windows still dark. But inside each student who had passed through the silver mirror ceremony, a new light burned. The light of self-knowledge. The light of hope. The light of understanding that being ambitious didn't mean being cruel. That striving for greatness could take countless forms. And that even in the deepest, darkest waters could live the brightest light. And in the underwater chamber, far beneath the lake, 12 silver mirrors stood in silence, keeping the secrets they'd shown this night. And on their surface, barely visible in darkness, glimmered a dim radiance, like an echo of all dreams, all hopes, all ambitions they'd reflected. And when the first ray of dawn touched the Black Lake's surface, the mirrors glowed for a moment brighter, as if bidding farewell until next Halloween, until the next night of self-knowledge. Albus Dumbledore stood by his office window, gazing at Hogwarts grounds, which slowly sank into the twilight of Halloween night. The October sun already touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, red and violet, as if an artist were mixing paints on an enormous canvas. Shadows from the castle's towers grew longer, stretching across clearings like dark fingers reaching toward the forbidden forest. He loved this time of day, this moment between light and darkness, when the world seemed to pause in anticipation. And today, on Halloween, this anticipation was especially palpable. The air trembled with magic, not threatening or dark, but festive, joyous, full of this night's ancient power, when the boundary between worlds became thin as gossamer. Fawkes, his phoenix, sat on a perch nearby, his feathers gleaming in the fading light. The bird sang quietly, not a full song, but something like melodious murmuring, soothing and warm. "Yes, old friend," Dumbledore whispered, stroking the golden feathers. "Tonight is a special night. I feel it. Something is changing within our castle's walls." He turned from the window and approached his desk where various papers and letters lay. But his thoughts weren't about paperwork. They were about students, about 4 houses he'd observed over many decades, about how each was unique, yet part of a whole. Throughout the day, various rumors had reached him, fragments of conversations, whispers in corridors, about Gryffindors reviving some ancient tradition with lanterns, about Hufflepuffs preparing a secret supper in their common room, about Ravenclaws finding something in the archives, some riddle of Rowena's, about Slytherins preparing for their mirror ceremony. Dumbledore smiled. This was good. This was very good. For too long the houses had existed separately, each in their own world, with their own traditions they didn't share. For too long Hogwarts had been not one home, but 4 different homes under one roof. But today something was changing. He felt it in the air, in the magic pulsing within the castle's walls. The clock on the wall struck 6. It was time to go to the Great Hall and check final preparations for the feast. Dumbledore took his wand. Long of Elder, the most powerful wand in the world, though few knew this, and left his office. Hogwarts corridors were filled with pre-holiday bustle. Students hurried to their common rooms to change into festive robes. Ghosts were already beginning their preparations. Nearly headless Nick was rehearsing his act, attempting to completely remove his head, which never quite succeeded, but he tried every year. The fat lady in her portrait sang operatic arias, her voice echoing through corridors. Even Peeves, the castle's poltergeist, was in festive mood. He was throwing not rotten eggs as usual, but small orange streamers that scattered in the air. Dumbledore walked slowly, savoring the atmosphere. His long purple robes, decorated with stars and moons that slowly moved, rustled behind him. His silver beard, falling almost to his waist, was neatly combed. His blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles shone with that special light that appeared when he was truly happy. The Great Hall was already prepared for the feast, and the sight was breathtaking. Dumbledore paused on the threshold for a moment, simply admiring the picture. The enchanted ceiling showed the night sky, but not an ordinary autumn sky, but Halloween sky. A full moon hung enormous and bright, surrounded by ragged clouds drifting incredibly fast. Stars twinkled brighter than usual. And most impressive were the bats, thousands of live bats circling beneath the ceiling, creating constant movement, a dance of wings in the air. Occasionally one descended lower, flew over tables, and students laughed, trying to touch it. In the corners stood enormous pumpkins, each the size of a small cottage. Their faces were carved masterfully. Some smiled, some grimaced, some looked regally magnificent. Inside each pumpkin burned candles, and their light seeped through the carvings, creating moving patterns on the floor. From the ceiling hung garlands of orange and black ribbons, intertwined with real autumn leaves, red, golden, amber. Between garlands hung small enchanted lanterns that shimmered with different colors, red, green, blue, yellow, as if symbolizing the house's colors. 4 long tables, one for each house, were covered with white tablecloths, and on them already stood golden plates, goblets and cutlery, gleaming in the light of hundreds of candles floating in the air above the tables. And at the hall's far end, on a raised platform, stood the staff table, also decorated and ready for the feast. Professor Minerva McGonagall was already in the hall, checking final details. She wore her finest emerald robes, and her hat was decorated with a feather that shimmered with different shades of green. When she saw Dumbledore, a smile appeared on her stern face. "Albus," she greeted, "everything's ready. The house elves have outdone themselves this year." "Indeed, Minerva," Dumbledore agreed, surveying the hall. "Truly wonderful work. But, you know, I feel the best is yet to come." McGonagall raised one eyebrow, a gesture she often used when intrigued or slightly skeptical. "Are you planning something, Albus?" she asked. He smiled, and his eyes sparkled. Nothing special, Minerva. I'm simply observing, and it seems to me tonight's evening will be special. Our students are preparing surprises. Other teachers began gathering. Professor Severus Snape entered in his unchanging black robes, his long hair neatly pulled back. He looked slightly tired, probably after the Slytherin ceremony, but his face bore an expression of quiet satisfaction which was a rarity. Professor Phileas Flitwick bounced with excitement, his small figure dressed in bright purple robes decorated with stars. Professor Pomona Sprout came last, still in her work clothes, smelling of earth and herbs, but with an enormous smile on her face. "Sorry for being late," she said, slightly breathless. "Had to help some Hufflepuffs carry something to the hall. They've prepared something special." Dumbledore smiled wider. "Wonderful, simply wonderful." The clock struck 7. It was time to invite the students. The Great Hall's doors opened, and students began entering. But this wasn't an ordinary entrance to a feast. This was something special. First came the Gryffindors, and Dumbledore held his breath. They carried lanterns, dozens of glass spheres, glowing with different shades of red, gold, orange. Each lantern pulsed with its own light, warm and alive. Students held them in their hands, or they floated in the air nearby, tied by invisible threads of magic. At the head of the procession walked a girl. Dumbledore recalled her name, Olivia Woodcroft, 4th year, and her lantern shone with the brightest golden light, illuminating her face, making her look like a small sun. "Courage, lanterns," McGonagall whispered beside him, awe in her voice. "I thought that tradition was lost forever." "And it has returned," Dumbledore replied softly. "As have many other wonderful things." The Gryffindors proceeded to their table, placing lanterns along its entire length. Light from them transformed Gryffindor's table into a radiant pathway leading into a fairy tale. Next came the Hufflepuffs, carrying something different, baskets and large platters filled with food. Honey buns still steaming and smelling of cinnamon. Apple pies, their golden crust gleaming in the light. Small jugs with something golden. Honey, Dumbledore guessed, but not ordinary honey. Cedric Diggory, a tall 5th year with a kind face, carried a large cauldron from which sweet steam rose. Behind him walked other students, and the smallest among them, a little 1st-year girl, carried a basket of fresh herbs. The Hufflepuffs didn't immediately sit at their table. Instead, they began distributing their food to other houses. They approached Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin tables, offering honey buns, sharing pies, pouring soup into bowls. "Share with us," they said. "This is Hufflepuff's tradition. Food becomes better when shared." Dumbledore saw how faces of students from other houses brightened with surprise and gratitude. Gryffindors took buns and felt their inner warmth. Ravenclaws tasted soup and felt calm. Even Slytherins, usually wary of gestures from other houses, accepted food with smiles. Then came the Ravenclaws, carrying parchments, books, and strange magical constructions. Dumbledore saw riddles, some written, some visual illusions, some complex mechanisms of sticks and paper that moved and changed. Marcus Silverquill, a 6th year with intelligent eyes behind spectacles, carried a large book, the Book of Ravens, Dumbledore guessed. But instead of keeping it for himself, the boy placed it on a separate table by the entrance, open for all who wished to read. "Wisdom shouldn't be hidden," Marcus announced, his voice echoing in the hall. "Today we share our riddles with everyone. Who wants to try solving them? Welcome. And who wants to create their own? We'll help." Ravenclaws set up their riddles throughout the hall, on tables, by walls, some even floated in the air. And students from other houses immediately began gravitating toward them, intrigued, interested, ready to test their minds. And finally came the Slytherins. They walked quietly, as always, their black robes with silver and green reflections, creating an impression of flowing water. But this time they didn't have the superior look others often expected from Slytherins. Instead, their faces showed openness, even vulnerability. Astra Malraux, a girl with dark hair and grey eyes, carried something wrapped in velvet cloth. When she reached the hall's center, she carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small silver mirror, not as large as those in the underwater chamber, but still enchanted with the same magic. "Students of Hogwarts," Astra said, her voice slightly trembling but determined. "Slytherin has a tradition we rarely speak of to others, the Silver Mirror Ceremony. These mirrors show our true ambitions, our deepest desires, and today we want to share this with you." She placed the mirror on a separate table. "Anyone who wishes may look, may see their own dreams. We don't judge, we don't criticize, we simply share the magic of self-knowledge." Silence fell. Dumbledore saw students from other houses exchange surprised glances. Slytherins, who had always been so closed, so protective of their traditions, were now opening up, inviting others into their inner circle. And then, unexpectedly, one Gryffindor, Dumbledore recognized Olivia Woodcroft, approached the table with the mirror. She looked at Astra, and a moment of quiet understanding passed between the two girls. Then, Olivia looked into the mirror. Dumbledore couldn't see what the mirror showed, but he saw Olivia's face. Surprise, a smile, a nod. When she stepped away, other students began approaching. First shyly, then more confidently, Dumbledore watched all this, and his heart filled with warmth he hadn't felt in many years. This was what he dreamed of. This was what Hogwarts existed for. He approached his place at the staff table but didn't sit immediately. Instead, he raised his hand, drawing attention. "Dear students," he began, his voice soft but reaching every corner of the hall. "Before we begin our feast, I would like to say a few words." The hall quietened. Even the bats overhead seemed to freeze in the air. "Over 1,000 years ago," Dumbledore continued, "4 of the greatest wizards of their time came together with one purpose. Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin dreamed of creating a place where young wizards could learn, grow, become themselves. But they also understood that people are different, that each person has their own strengths, their own paths to greatness." He paused, looking at the 4 tables, at students, faces listening attentively. "Therefore they created 4 houses, not to divide us, but to give everyone a place where they could flourish. Gryffindor for the brave, Hufflepuff for the loyal, Ravenclaw for the wise, Slytherin for the ambitious. But the founders also knew something important, something we sometimes forget." He raised his hands, encompassing the hall. "They knew that Hogwarts, true magic comes not from our being different, it comes from our being different together. That bravery needs wisdom, that loyalty needs ambition, that each house makes others stronger by its presence." Dumbledore looked at Olivia with her lantern. "Bravery without understanding is recklessness." At Cedric with his honey buns. "Loyalty without purpose is blind following." At Marcus with his riddles. "Wisdom without compassion is cold knowledge." And at Astra with her mirror. "Ambition without morality is empty power." He lowered his hands, his voice becoming warmer. "But when we combine our gifts, when we share our traditions, when we see in one another not rivals but friends, then we become truly magical. Then Hogwarts becomes not just a school but a home." He smiled, his blue eyes shining. "Tonight, you students have reminded me, reminded all of us, of this important truth. You've shared your light, your warmth, your wisdom, your dreams. And in this sharing you've created something beautiful." He raised his wand, and suddenly all candles in the hall flared brighter, filling the space with golden radiance. "So let us celebrate. Celebrate not only Halloween but unity in diversity. Celebrate what makes us unique and what makes us one. Enjoy." And with these words, golden plates on tables filled with food. This was a feast Hogwarts hadn't seen in many years. The food was traditional and wonderful: roasted chickens, rosemary potatoes, vegetables in various dishes, meat pies, stews, salads. But this time, traditional dishes were joined by Hufflepuff dishes, honey buns distributed on all tables, pies cut and shared, soup poured for all who wanted. And students didn't sit only at their own tables. They moved from one to another, carrying their lanterns, sharing riddles, telling about what they'd seen in mirrors. Dumbledore saw Olivia Woodcroft sitting at Slytherin's table, talking with Astra Malrow. 2 girls who under ordinary circumstances might never have spoken were now laughing together, exchanging stories. He saw Cedric Diggory teaching a small Ravenclaw first year how to properly eat a honey bun. You must eat it in one bite to feel all the warmth. He saw Marcus Silverquill showing a group of Slytherins one of his most complex riddles, and they worked on it together, their heads bent over parchment. He saw Cormac Vasey, a small Slytherin first year, sitting beside Hannah Abbott, a Hufflepuff first year, and both telling each other about their dreams. He about magical creatures, she about teaching children. And most beautiful was that teachers also joined. Professor McGonagall approached Olivia to look at the lanterns more closely, and Dumbledore heard her quietly praising the girl for reviving the tradition. Professor Snape, though remaining at the staff table, watched his Slytherins with an expression that could be called pride. Professor Flitwick bounced between tables, excitedly discussing riddles with Ravenclaws. And Professor Sprout treated everyone to her herbal infusions she'd brought from the greenhouses. The feast lasted for hours, and the great hall was filled with sounds of laughter, conversations, clinking goblets. Ghosts joined the celebration. Nearly headless Nick finally managed to almost completely remove his head, which prompted thunderous applause. The Grey Lady, usually so reclusive, floated between tables, watching students with a quiet smile. Even the Bloody Baron, Slytherin's gloomy ghost, looked less formidable than usual. And Peeves put on a real show, juggling pumpkins and creating fireworks of streamers that exploded above students' heads in showers of confetti. When desserts appeared on tables, pumpkin pies, apple tarts, sweets, and ice cream shaped like little ghosts, Dumbledore felt it was time for the final touch. He stood again, and the hall gradually quietened. "There is one more tradition," he said, "that we sometimes forget, an ancient tradition that exists as long as Hogwarts itself." He raised his wand, and musical notes appeared in the air, actual note symbols glowing with golden light, floating above tables. "The Hogwarts song," someone whispered, and the words spread through the hall. Dumbledore began, and his voice, though elderly, was melodious. "Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts, teach us something, please." First teachers joined, then older students who knew the words, then everyone else. Each sang to their own melody. This was the peculiarity of Hogwarts song, that everyone could sing it as they liked. Some sang it as a march, some as a waltz, some as a funeral dirge, usually Slytherin's, and some as a merry dance tune. But despite the melody's diversity, the words were the same. Whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees, our heads could do with filling, with some interesting stuff, for now they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we've forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot. Voices merged into an amazing cacophony that was somehow harmonious. Gryffindors sang loudly and passionately. Hufflepuffs, warmly and melodiously. Ravenclaws, in complex harmonies. Slytherins, low and dramatically. And when the song reached its peak, when all voices united in the final line, something magical happened. Gryffindor's lanterns flared brighter, their light rising to the ceiling. Hufflepuff dishes, aromas filled the hall with new strength. Ravenclaw riddles began glowing, their runes dancing in the air. And Slytherin's mirror reflected not separate reflections but the entire hall. All students together, united as one. Dumbledore watched this, and tears stood in his eyes. Not sad tears, happy ones. For this was a moment he'd been waiting for, perhaps, all his life as headmaster. The moment when Hogwarts finally became what it was meant to be, not 4 separate houses but one home. When the song ended, silence fell. Not an awkward silence but a silence of awe, silence of understanding that something important had just happened. And then, unexpectedly, the ghosts began to dance. Nearly headless Nick whirled in the air, his head swaying dangerously. The Grey Lady glided smoothly between tables, her silvery figure leaving a trail of light. The Fat Friar bounced and laughed. Even the Bloody Baron moved in something resembling a dance, though it was more a slow, stately drift. And students joined. They rose from tables, took hands, Gryffindor with Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw with Slytherin, and began dancing. Not organized, not in any specific order, but simply moving to music that seemed to come from the castle's very walls. Dumbledore watched Olivia dance with Cedric, both laughing. Marcus twirling little Clarice Knott, who giggled with joy. Astra holding hands with Cormac and Hannah, leading them in a circle dance. Even teachers joined. Professor McGonagall, always so stern and controlled, allowed Professor Flitwick to lead her in a waltz. Professor Sprout danced with Hagrid, the enormous gamekeeper who'd come to the feast later and now wiped happy tears from his beard. Even Professor Snape, though not dancing, tapped his fingers on the table in time with the music, which for him was an almost revolutionary display of joy. The castle itself seemed to celebrate. Candles burned brighter, decorations shimmered, bats flew in complex patterns, and the enchanted ceiling showed more and more shooting stars, leaving trails of silver light. Dumbledore finally sat, feeling pleasant fatigue. Fawkes, who had remained in his office, suddenly appeared in the hall, flew in a circle above students, singing his song. Not a song of resurrection or battle, but a song of joy, pure and crystalline. His golden and red feathers gleamed in the light, and students gazed at him with awe. The bird landed on Dumbledore's shoulder, and the old wizard stroked his soft feathers. "Yes, old friend," he whispered, "this is truly a special evening." The clock struck 11. The feast was slowly drawing to a close. Students began returning to their tables, gathering their things. But the atmosphere remained warm, filled with something new. Understanding, friendship, unity. Before dismissing students, Dumbledore stood again. "Before you go," he said, "I want to thank you, not for doing something I expected of you, but for doing something that exceeded all expectations." He looked at the 4 tables, at all faces gazing at him. "Tonight you've shown what it means to be a true community. You've shared what's most valuable to you. Your traditions, your dreams, your hearts. And in this sharing you've created something that will last far longer than this night." He smiled, his eyes shining in candlelight. "Remember this feeling of unity, belonging, understanding that you're all, regardless of house, part of one home. And when difficult times come, and they will come, as they always do, remember that your strength isn't in being separate, your strength is in being together." He raised his wand one last time, and all lanterns, all candles, all magical fires in the hall flared simultaneously, creating a moment of dazzling, beautiful light. "Happy Halloween, dear students, and now, good night." Students began leaving, but without hurrying, not wanting the magic of this evening to end. Gryffindors carried their lanterns, illuminating the castle's corridors. Hufflepuffs left several honey buns by the exit, for those returning late, one girl explained. Ravenclaws took their riddles, but left a few simplest ones on tables, for those who want to think before sleep. And Slytherins took their mirror, but Astra stopped by the doors and turned. "Thank you, Professor Dumbledore," she said quietly, "for allowing us to be ourselves." Dumbledore smiled at her. "Dear Astra," he replied, "I didn't allow anything. You yourselves found the courage to be yourselves. I simply had the privilege of observing." When the last student left the hall and the doors closed, Dumbledore remained standing alone. The great hall was empty now, but it still retained the celebration's atmosphere, food aromas, laughter's echo, warmth from hundreds of people who'd been happy here. Professor McGonagall approached him, her steps echoing in the silence. "That was an exceptional evening, Albus," she said. "I haven't seen anything like it in all my years of teaching here." "Indeed, Minerva," he agreed. "But the most beautiful thing is that it happened naturally. We didn't plan it. We didn't organize it. Students themselves found a way to one another." She was silent a moment, then added, "Do you think it will last? This feeling of unity?" Dumbledore turned to her, and in his eyes was wisdom of many years, many battles, many losses, but also hope. "That will depend on them, Minerva, on the choices they make each day, on whether they remember what they felt tonight. But I believe, yes, I believe something has changed. That a seed has been planted. And if we nurture it, if we remind them they can be greater together than apart, then yes, it will last." They left the hall together, leaving it in darkness. But even in darkness, last reflections of magic could be seen. Dim shimmer where lanterns stood, faint aroma where food was, whisper of riddles in the air, echo of mirrors in shadows. Dumbledore climbed stairs to his tower slowly, his old bones reminding themselves after a long evening. But his spirit was young, filled with joy and hope. When he entered his office, the moon already hung high above the castle, large and bright. He approached the window and looked down at Hogwarts grounds. From here he could see small lights moving. These were students returning to their common rooms. Gryffindor's lanterns still glowed, creating a chain of fire leading to their tower, and Dumbledore saw something that made his heart sing. By the castle entrance stood 4 students, one from each house. He couldn't hear what they were talking about, but he saw their smiling faces, saw how they hugged before parting in different directions. Olivia Woodcroft, Cedric Diggory, Marcus Silverquill, and Astra Malraux. 4 students who might never have met under other circumstances, and now were friends. "This is how it begins," Dumbledore whispered to the darkness. "This is how change begins. Not with grand decrees or dramatic battles, but with small moments of understanding, with simple gestures of kindness, with a decision to see in another, not an enemy but a friend." Fawkes sang again, quietly and melodiously, and Dumbledore felt all worries, all anxieties recede. At least for this night. At least for this moment. He sat in his armchair by the fireplace where fire burned with soft flame. On the table beside him lay a book, Hogwarts Chronicle, where all important events were recorded. Dumbledore took a quill, dipped it in ink, and began writing. October 31st, 1992. Halloween. Tonight something rare and beautiful happened. Students of 4 houses, who had lived separately too long, found a way to one another. Gryffindor shared its light. Hufflepuff shared its warmth. Ravenclaw shared its wisdom. Slytherin shared its depth, and in this sharing they discovered what the founders always knew, that we are stronger together. That our differences don't make us enemies but make us complete. That unity doesn't mean sameness but means harmony in diversity. I don't know what the future holds. Dark times are approaching. I feel them in the air, in signs I see. But tonight I saw hope. I saw that a new generation is growing differently, thinking differently, choosing differently. And if we can preserve this spirit, this unity, this readiness to see in one another, not enemies but allies, then perhaps when darkness comes, the light will be strong enough to disperse it. The founders were wise. They built not just a school, they built a home. And today students reminded us what a true home means. It's a place where everyone has their place, where everyone is valued for who they are, where diversity is celebrated, not feared. Halloween 1992. The day Hogwarts became itself again. Dumbledore set down his quill and closed the book. He leaned back in his armchair, closed his eyes, and smiled. Outside the window, the moon continued its path across the sky. Stars twinkled. Hogwarts Castle stood in its place, as it had stood for centuries, its towers reaching toward the sky, its windows glowing with dim light. And inside, in 4 common rooms, students prepared for sleep, each carrying in their heart a memory of this special evening. A memory of light, warmth, wisdom, and depth. A memory of how diversity could create beauty. A memory of unity. In Gryffindor Tower, lanterns still glowed, placed on windowsills and the mantelpiece, filling the room with warm golden radiance. Olivia lay in her bed and smiled, thinking about the new friends she'd found this evening. In the dungeons by the kitchens, in Hufflepuff's common room, the aroma of honey and cinnamon still lingered in the air. Cedric sat by the fireplace with Hannah, telling her stories about Hogwarts, old times, and the girl listened, her eyes no longer frightened but shining with curiosity and trust. In the high Ravenclaw tower, beneath the star-studded ceiling, Marcus reviewed parchments with riddles that other students had brought, not only Ravenclaws, but Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, even Slytherins. Each riddle was unique, each told something about whoever created it, and he understood that wisdom comes in countless forms. And deep beneath the lake, in Slytherin's cool dungeons, Astra stood by the window, gazing at water swaying behind the glass. Beside her stood little Cormac, and she held his hand, both silently enjoying the night's peace. The ceremony mirror stood on the table behind them, and though it no longer showed visions, it still glowed with dim silver light, a reminder that each of them had dreams worth fighting for. Halloween at Hogwarts ended not with a bang of fireworks or grand ceremony but quietly and naturally, as true celebrations should end. Students dispersed, but they took with them something invisible, new friendships, new understandings, new possibilities. And when the first rays of dawn touched the castle's towers, when Halloween night yielded to a new day, Hogwarts awoke slightly changed. Not outwardly. Outwardly it was the same magnificent castle that had stood here for centuries. But inside, in the hearts of those who lived in it, something had fundamentally shifted. They understood that being different was a gift. That each house brought something valuable. That bravery, loyalty, wisdom, and ambition weren't opposites but different facets of one diamond. And most importantly, they understood that Hogwarts' true magic wasn't in spells or potions, not in ancient traditions or powerful artifacts. Hogwarts' true magic was people. People who chose to see the best in one another, people who shared their light instead of hiding it. People who understood that together they created something greater than the sum of their parts. And as long as this understanding lived, as long as students remembered what they felt this Halloween, Hogwarts was not just a school of magic, it was home, a true home. For all.